It's been over 5 years since I saw Into the Spider-Verse in theaters, and it's officially been 1 year since Across the Spider-Verse was released in theaters. The film was initially supposed to come out in 2022 on multiple different dates, but it wouldn't be until a year later when the film was actually released. Here's a tweet from the official Spider-Verse Twitter that I took a screenshot of in 2022. April 8th, 2022 as a release date for Across the Spider-Verse, and then October 2022, and then it was scrapped for 2023. Here's a quote from Sony Pictures Animation's president, Christine Belson, from the art book. The first movie was astronomically challenging, and everyone was working on it until the very last second. So we really didn't start thinking about the sequel until after we wrapped the project in 2018. She's talking about Into the Spider-Verse. Of course, both writers-producers Phil Lord and Christopher Miller have always known where we were going with this story. So in reference to Beyond the Spider-Verse, I'm not sure when they started writing the film, but people seem to forget just how long it takes to create these films because, and I will talk about this later, a lot of people complained about the film being split into two parts, and they didn't even start thinking about the second film until after the first one, as this quote says. So like I had said in my intro, this video was supposed to come out a year after Across the Spider-Verse came out, but life happens, whatever. So instead, this video is going to be a retrospective of a 1 year and some months after the release of Across the Spider-Verse. It will be in a podcast-like style, so you don't necessarily have to look at the screen, but if you want to, I will have visuals. And I do want to preface this by saying it's not an Easter egg video. It's not one of those, how many spider people were in the chase scene, or like, this is how many, whatever. I'm not doing that. This video is mainly going to be me talking about more of the story and plot of the film and stuff that pertains to that. So I first wanted to start out by discussing the sources that I used because every good video essay should be well researched. So the first thing that I looked at was the Across the Spider-Verse art book, and like all art books, it gives its audience a lot of introspective into how certain characters were designed and how certain places were designed and why they look the way they do. And that's all really cool, and we know, like everyone knows, that the film itself is gorgeous, but I'm not here to talk about that. The main takeaway I took from the art book were the written sections. There was a lot of crucial information within the written sections and quotes from different people on the production team that I found to be very interesting that I would like to talk about and bring up as I discuss the film. Next is the Blu-ray. So I got this Target exclusive Blu-ray pack that came with poster cards that I will be talking about, like the character poster cards that I'll be talking about a little later. The Blu-ray features for any film have so much information on like how the films were made and all that type of stuff. I think that it's kind of funny because I don't know if people are still saying this because I got off of Twitter years ago, but I've seen a lot of people online complaining that we don't get like director's commentary or special features, and people talk about the death of DVDs and physical media, and all of that are valid concerns, but they still make Blu-ray DVDs. We still have Blu-ray DVDs, and we still have special features and director's commentary for new films, and Across the Spider-Verse is no different. Part of the Blu-ray has filmmaker's commentary, which features Justin K. Thompson, who's one of the directors. There's Joaquim Dos Santos, who is the director and storyboarder for the film. Kent Powers is one of the directors. Christopher Miller, who co-wrote the screenplay with Phil Lord. They all speak during the director's commentary and give their insight and their like behind the scenes knowledge on the film. So they have a lot of interesting things to say as well. There's also a lot of footage from the creation of the film and then like with voice actors and all of that. Really interesting stuff there. We'll get into that a little bit later. Of course, the film itself is one of the main sources that I am using, and my personal favorite source is the screenplay. So I've listened to a lot of, and I mean a lot, of like commentary videos and like analysis videos about like film and television, but one thing that I see people lacking is talking about the screenplay. If you don't know, a screenplay is also known as a script. It has to be written before a film is shot or animated or whatever. The thing I find particularly interesting about this screenplay is that it was written by Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, and Dave Callaham. They all co-wrote it. With screenplays, at least the way I was taught and what I understand from traditional screenplay
rules is that when you write them, you're not allowed to write about characters' internal feelings, so it's not like a book. It has to be very concise and very like to the point, so you can't say something like, oh, Miles thought that. You would have to show it. So the basic rule in screenwriting is that don't write anything your audience can't see, and your audience cannot see thoughts unless they are voiced or through like voiceover or physical body language, whatever. But if you are well known within the industry, you can kind of get away with doing whatever you want. So these three do include internal dialogue and feelings that we don't necessarily see as much within the film that might clear up some confusion about some discourse that people have been having pertaining certain characters like Jessica Drew or Gwen, what they were thinking in pivotal moments. So I love the Across the Spider-Verse screenplay, and it has provided so much content for me to pull from for this video. Also, screenplays in general are so fun to read because if you know how to write them, you know how to write them. Like, they're so entertaining that you don't even need the visuals to have it be something people enjoy reading. So if there's a film that you really love, like Across the Spider-Verse, I recommend going online. You can usually find the screenplay for free and just reading through. It's a lot of fun. Lastly, our order of business, or the structure of the video. So I'm going to start with the characters and their arcs, where we left them in Into the Spider-Verse, and where we meet them in Across the Spider-Verse, as well as where we leave them in Across the Spider-Verse. The next section is going to be about character relationships, and I broke those down into characters. So it's like Miles and Gwen, Miles and his parents, Miles and Miguel, like that type of thing. Then lastly, I kind of want to talk about where I think Beyond the Spider-Verse might be heading, where it might be going, where it might already be, depending on how far we are in development, based on the way the film went and then the way all of the sources talk about the film and even hint at stuff with Beyond the Spider-Verse. Before the video starts, I do want to apologize for any audio quality, random changes, tone changes, all of that, because I've recorded this video on and off for like over a year. So if I sound different at any point in time, that's probably why.
Everyone keeps telling me how my story is supposed to go. Nah, I'm gonna do my own thing.
So Miles' card says, Miles Morales is the Spider-Man of Earth 1610. He splits his time between fighting crime as a superhero and dealing with school and parents as a teenager in Brooklyn. His spider abilities include strength, speed, durability, spider sense, venom strike, and invisibility, among others. Where we leave Miles and Into the Spider-Verse is really interesting to look back at because of how confident he's become as a spider person. And of course, the first film deals with his origins, becoming a Spider-Man and having to deal with being unsure of being a spider person and gaining his confidence. In the last couple scenes that we see Miles in the first film, he successfully stops Kingpin's collider after saying goodbye to all his friends, who have to go through the interdimensional portal to go home, which carries on into the next film and why he's so adamant about his career choice and that type of thing. The last few scenes with Miles also hints at him feeling alone and being the only spider person and not having his friends around. He says, and when I feel alone, like no one understands what I'm going through, and he basically says he just thinks back to his friends, but it's something that is teased in this film and then expanded, not only through Miles, but also through Gwen as well, and we'll get into that later. The very last scene that we see Miles in was changed for Across the Spider-Verse, but it teases that meeting of Gwen and Miles and the possibility that Gwen somehow gets access to Miles's world again, which had a lot of people, and myself included, very, very hyped for the next film years down the line. As I mentioned before, in Into the Spider-Verse, we get to see Miles get to that point of confidence to take that leap of faith. And in Across the Spider-Verse, we see how he's grown into that confidence, not only mentally, but physically too. Miles's face as well as his height has changed, and in the art book they do talk about how they went through designs to show that Miles had grown in both aspects. Miles's transition from a kid from the first film to a teen at the beginning of the second film to an adult at the end of the second film through his character arcs, and that is something that the creators have also spoken about and that they have deliberately done, where they're showing his development through those stages. Dos Santos says, "This is Miles' story. Everywhere we go and all the amazing worlds we visit are in service to his story. We want to chase everything in these worlds, like kids in a candy store, but we never lose sight of the fact that the audience is going to experience traveling through these kaleidoscopic worlds through Miles' eyes." I think that quote is extremely important to look at because Like Miles, and I'll talk about this later, like he is grounded by his family. His family is his rock, his anchor. We as an audience are also grounded by Miles and his journey. And of course, it's all about him and he's at the central focus. And to know that the creators intended for that, even though we are seeing so many different characters in so many different worlds, makes it even more important to take a look at Miles's story and character. I'll talk about this scene a little bit more when I get into the character relationships, but the council scene is very important when looking at Miles because we get that confirmation that he is still thinking of his friends and wanting to be with them, because we see it very clearly with Gwen, but we're not entirely sure what's going on with Miles when we first encounter him. And this scene gives us that, oh, okay, this is something that's deeply affecting him beyond the little glimpse that we got at the end of Into the Spider-Verse. So we know that Miles wants to see his friends, he feels isolated, and then, of course, I will talk about this again in the character relationship section, specifically with Miles, Rio, and Jeff, that he is having some issues, like relationship strains with them about keeping his identity a secret from his parents, which, again, is another parallel to what Gwen had dealt with earlier in the film with her father. We leave Miles in Across the Spider-Verse in a very, very bad situation, seemingly bad. More on that later. After escaping Miguel and all of the spiders who were chasing him down because he wanted to save his father from a canon event, a death that might be at the hands of the Spot, we'll see. Miles ends up in the wrong universe because the spider that bit him has DNA from Earth 42, and that DNA is in Miles, which is why the Go Home machine sends him there. And if anyone is to blame, and I have a name for you, it's Dan Slott, who was the film's production consultant. He watched the first film and he saw the spider glitching that bit Miles, and he said to the team, well, per your rules in this film, and in the first film, that means that the spider was from the wrong universe, right? And to quote him, he says, when he was thinking this through, did Miles ruin everything? Is Miles to blame for everything? And I think this is interesting because I don't know if Dan was put on while the screenplay was being written or if he was put on afterwards. But it's just interesting to think that that might not have been the crew's initial idea about where Miles might end up at the end of the film. And I just thought that it was genius when I saw it because I overlooked the glitching, but it's Dan Slott's fault that Miles is in Earth 32 and that everyone is looking for him and going to rescue him at the end of the film. So thanks, Dan, for the insanity and the stress you put me through for the past year or so.
Parker ate at my table. He was my daughter's best friend, and I will not rest until I find this Spider-Woman.
Gwen's card says, Gwen Stacy, aka the Amazing Spider-Woman of Earth 65, is a confident superhero who is able to understand what Miles is going through, both as a high school student and as a masked crime fighter. Her spider abilities include enhanced strength, speed, agility, and spider sense. Gwen, like everyone else, goes home having made a new friend in Miles, so she goes through the interdimensional portal that Miles closes after everyone else has gone home. She does show up in the end, although it's through a voiceover, having somehow made a portal to visit Miles, and of course we see how she does that, or how she gets to Miles in the next film. I do want to mention that one thing I love about Across the Spider-Verse versus Into the Spider-Verse is the expansion of Gwen's character. I understand when it comes to an ensemble cast, it's impossible to get so in-depth with individual characters, especially because, like the quote from Dos Santos says before, the story has always been about Miles. And it's just interesting to see an expansion of Gwen's character, especially because in the first art book, and I don't have it in front of me, but someone was quoted saying something along the lines of, there's no one cooler than Gwen Stacy. So she's shown to be very confident, very cool. In this film, we get to see more of her insecurities and we get more up close and personal with her. And that's something I really love about this film. And the filmmakers had referred to this film as a film about Miles, but with a Gwen Stacy short in the beginning. So like I had mentioned, I love this film for giving spotlight to and fleshing out characters who didn't have that space in the first film. And it's hard to get a grasp on her character outside of her coolness and her confidence. We see as a result of that being part of her character, but also because the film is from Miles's point of view, and that's how he saw her in the first film and continued to see her up until a certain point. Where we meet Gwen, it's been very, very hard on her, having no one that she can speak to about being Spider-Woman and no one who can understand her. So she's in a similar position as Miles, but with her, it seems to be taking, I would say, not necessarily a harder toll, but more so a more visible toll, because she's had to deal with this longer than Miles has, and you can really see that it's gotten to her, especially after having made another friend after Peter. And not to sound like a broken record, but I will talk about that in the Miles and Gwen section. Dean Gordon, who's the art director of the film, says, Gwen has her own color palette, which is very expressive and based on her mood. She's kind of a mood ring, and whatever she's experiencing is expressed in the color of that scene. So I know I said I wouldn't talk a lot about the visuals, but because Gwen as a character, her emotions and how she's feeling affects the overall world, it is important to note that anytime we're in the world, all of the colors and the way that they move, whether they're very striking or more pale and laid back or very dramatic, is all internal feelings that she may not be voicing out loud, but that we are seeing. Since Gwen is hyper-focused on the present moment, anything beyond her attention fades into an abstract wash of color in the background as a visual representation of her tunnel vision. That's another point on her world and just how her mentality might be working, how she's kind of one-track minded. We see this in the beginning scenes when she's on the train and we see these visuals of Miles reflected in the windows. And where we leave Gwen, so she is sent home by Miguel, basically as a scapegoat for his frustrations on not being able to catch Miles. And she goes back home. She does make up with her father, and thanks to Hobie, she's given a watch that she's able to go and assemble a team to go and rescue Miles from going to the wrong universe. So we will see the aftermath of that in Beyond the Spider-Verse.
Miguel's character card reads, Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099 of Nueva York on Earth 928, is the creator and commander of the interdimensional force known as the Spider Society. More serious and darker than some of the other Spider-Humans, he is focused on fixing anomalies in the Spider-Verse. When I had first watched Across the Spider-Verse, I had gone back and rewatched Into the Spider-Verse before I went to see Across the Spider-Verse again in theaters. I was shocked by the end credit scene because I was like, how in the world did I completely wipe this end credit scene from my mind? Because I saw it in theaters multiple times and I somehow forgot. So anyways, where we leave Miguel in Into the Spider-Verse, so we see him in the post-credit scene. We meet both him and LYLA. LYLA finishes the prototype for the interdimensional travel watch that we see in Across the Spider-Verse, and we see Miguel make his first portal jump. And that's when we see the Spider-Man pointing meme, and it was a big deal at the time. They, meaning Miguel and LYLA, have somehow been monitoring Miles in the events of the first film, which we see on like several screens in the post-credit scene. Their dynamic is more like silly here. I just think that's a funny contrast to think about. I mean, Lila's still silly in the film, but just the tone is more lighthearted than what we get in the film. So we meet Miguel post losing his daughter in his world and in the other world. Miguel is very much, to me, the way I see him is like, I suffered as a kid growing up, so you have to suffer too kind of deal. That'll make more sense in a second. So Miguel's world, and I know I said I wasn't going to talk a lot about people's worlds and like the design and stuff like that, but I think it's important to him as a character. Miguel's world is a utopia, so it's quoted in the art book as, in this universe, the ruling class has traded humanism for opulent, AI-controlled, perfect paradise. And the underbelly of the city that we see during Miguel's crash out, when he is chasing Miles and like throwing him through like buildings and stuff, is kind of just showing a metaphor for Miguel. This world appears to be a utopia and pristine and clean at the top, but when you get to the underbelly, it's just this insane, unkept, gritty type of deal. And with Miguel, it's kind of like an anger that's boiling under the surface that is released when he starts chasing Miles down like a rabid dog. So Santos is quoted saying in the art book, proving time and time again that he's willing to make painfully hard decisions in service of maintaining balance. There's a massive amount of responsibility for one person to shoulder. If you know anything about me, or if you know me at all, you should know that I'm not the biggest fan of Miguel, but as an analyzer, I can understand why he is the way that he is. And Dos Santos's quote just shows like how much pressure Miguel is under. I mean, he has like this controlling nature because of his actual lack of control over his fate. And I feel like he feels that he has to control everything, and he rationalizes it by thinking to himself that if he doesn't have this like strict control and this like tight leash on everyone or everything, then worlds will fall apart, as it did with him and his daughter. That's very heavy that he has to deal with. I did mention his daughter, so if you don't remember, Miguel goes to another universe to replace himself, who has died in that universe, to be with his daughter. And because he did that, he messed with the timeline and with the canon of that universe, and so his universe falls apart in the same way that Pav's is falling apart as we speak. That is, at least in my eyes, like one of the reasons that he's so adamant about, Miles not breaking canon, besides what I will be talking about in Miles and Miguel's character section, because I do think it's a little bit deeper than that. He also says to Miles that he was the original anomaly, meaning that Miguel's retelling of the universe falling apart happened post Into the Spider-Verse, but pre Across the Spider-Verse. The reason why I bring up his daughter again, besides the fact that it's one of his main character motivations, is that it's another callback to Kingpin in a way, like Kingpin wanting to bring back his family, hence him creating the Collider, Miles's universe being on the brink of collapse, and like him just trying to pull his family members from different universes into his universe is kind of like the opposite of what Miguel did when he tried to replace himself in another universe.
I am the Spot.
There is no card for the Spot in the Blu-ray, so we're just gonna go with where we left him in Into the Spider-Verse. Before he was the Spot, he was known as Dr. Jonathan Owen, and we see him get hit by a bagel, and that's the last time we see him, I believe, until the second film, where we meet him in Across the Spider-Verse. He's resorted to a life of crime because his life as he knew it was essentially over. I do think that his relationship with Miles being a continuation of his mistreatment by Dr. Octavius is something to take into account. He wasn't taken seriously by her, and it goes a little bit deeper than that, which will be discussed in his character section with Miles. His snapping at Miles and just becoming completely OP didn't just happen because he was just mad. It was something that, like Miguel, was boiling under the surface, and Miles unfortunately just happened to be the catalyst that made him snap. Justin K. Thompson says, as we walk through his place, talking about the Spot now, we see smaller prototype versions of the Super Collider. We realize that Octavius stole the core of the technology from this guy. So, like I was saying, the Spot's anger at Miles is just a continuation of him not being taken seriously throughout his career, and then he gets this idea for the Super Collider that Kingpin, who of course, as a Kingpin, has a lot of money, has a lot of sway and that type of thing, was using. And of course, we see in the first film that Octavius is essentially in charge at Alchemix, which, if life was fair, would have gone to Jonathan. Spot, from his design, we can see that he's a work in progress because of the blue lines in his design. It's kind of like a sketch that artists would use to line with like lining pens or markers and that type of thing. And then that goes away, I believe, when he starts going off the wall. And we see that is described as his untapped potential, that sketching, that blue line that we see when we first encounter him in the convenience store when he's trying to steal the ATM, or the ATM machine as he's calling it. And where we leave him, he's gone absolutely berserk and is in Miles's dimension getting ready to kill Jeff. More on that later, but he disappears for a little bit in the film after they're unable to stop the collider from going off in Mumbattan. And it's not like we forget about him, but we're so focused on Miles and what he's doing that by the time you sit and think about it, you're like, wait, where's the Spot? And then you see that scene where he teleports or goes through a portal or one of his spots into Miles's universe, and you're like, oh, this isn't gonna be good at all. Whether he'll succeed in destroying Miles's world or killing Jeff, we will see. But Jonathan is another tragic case. The thing about these Spider-Verse villains, we had Kingpin and then we have the Spot, is like, they're not just pure evil. With Kingpin, of course, the loss of his family, if you can feel empathy for Miguel, then you can feel empathy for Kingpin, right? But then similarly with the Spot or with Jonathan, not being taken seriously, having your work stolen from you, and then not being taken seriously again is something that deeply hurt him. And so, as they say, hurt people, and he is hell-bent on doing just that.
How are you even cooler under your mask?
I was just cool the whole time.
Hobie Brown, aka Spider-Punk of Earth 138, is both a superhero and a rock star. He's from a world that mixes 1970s and 80s London with modern-day New York. He wields a rock guitar that he uses to play music and also utilizes it as a sonic weapon. Living up to his rock star persona, he is an anarchist and prefers to make his own rules and go his own way. Interesting enough, we meet Hobie in Mumbattan, where we also meet Pav, and he is so cool. Similar in the way that Jess Drew is introduced, he comes in swinging, literally. According to Powers again, he's, meaning Hobie, he's that cool, slightly older boy who is pretty easy for most girls to have a crush on. And Powers also says he's much older than Miles. And of course, Miles is jealous of Hobie. Another thing that I wanted to mention about Hobie is how the screenplay describes him. There's multiple excerpts that I think are funny. Strong, long, and skinny hot, covered in torn plaids and denims, a spiked mohawk coming out of his spider mask, a throbbing electric guitar slung across his back. That was when we first meet him. Another part says, Hobie peels off his mask. He's, Notchmate, insanely hot. And I think it's funny seeing how many people were obsessed with Hobie when the film came out and were like, oh my gosh, his design is so cool and he's such an attractive character. And then to look at the screenplay and to see that these writers and the creators of the film did that intentionally, fully intentionally. So that's funny. But enough about Hobie's attractiveness for a second. Hobie, like his card says, is an anarchist. He doesn't follow the rules, and that is shown throughout the film with him stealing stuff from the Spider HQ, which is then what he uses to create a watch for Gwen to even be able to rescue Miles. And I think Hobie, despite Miles being jealous of him and that type of thing, which I will talk about a little bit more in their character section, he is a perfect role model or ally to Miles because of just his nature of being a rule breaker. That is exactly why he doesn't get along very well with Miguel. Should I say that Miguel doesn't get along very well with Hobie because he's just that type of person who doesn't care and isn't gonna follow you just because you're an authoritarian figure. Because of him, we have a way for Miles to even be rescued. If it wasn't for Hobie, Miles, who knows, could be stranded in Earth 42 with no help on the way forever. Pavitr Prabhakar is the Spider-Man of Mumbattan on Earth 50101. Unlike other spider people, Pavitr gained his spider powers through magic. He is an optimistic, glass-half-full person who shares Miles' struggle at being a young teenager with the responsibilities of a superhero. We meet Pav when Gwen goes through the portal after getting chewed out a little bit by Jess about letting the Spot go when she goes to visit Miles, and he is in his early phases of being a Spider-Man, which is why he's so optimistic and so happy-go-lucky, because he hasn't experienced the horrors yet. Like the card says, Pav didn't get his spider powers through a radioactive spider. According to Powers, he actually gained his powers from a mystical shaman, which I think is interesting. Where we leave Pav, unfortunately, is that his world is falling apart. It was Miles' fault, and I don't say fault in a negative connotation, but if Miles hadn't saved Gayatri, Pav's girlfriend's dad, who is a police officer, then Pav's world wouldn't be falling apart because it was a canon event that Gayatri's dad was going to die, but Miles saved him along with a child that Gayatri's dad was trying to save, if you followed any of that. So his world is falling apart, but some of the Spider Society is there to contain the damage and that type of thing. Not only because the world's falling apart because of Miles disrupting a canon event, another one, but also because of the Collider, Kingpin, has in this world, whatever version of Kingpin created this collider that the Spot used to gain more spots. And where we actually fully leave Pav, we see him with the rest of Gwen's spider band getting ready to go and rescue Miles. Although his world is falling apart, Pav, being the person he is still willing to go help rescue Miles, which I think is a testament for his character.
Look at this pig!
Oh, you got them. They are. Wow,
She's incredible!
We see less of him in this film than we did in the first film, and I'm okay with that because there's so many other things going on, but he is still in this film. He is also not in the Blu-ray, so we'll just go right into where we left him in Into the Spider-Verse. He turns up to MJ's house with flowers, having gone through his own character development, having mentored Miles, and deciding that, yes, he did want kids and he did want to continue having a relationship with MJ. So they do get back together. And where we meet him in Across the Spider-Verse, we get to see the aftermath of his proposal to MJ of them being together again, and that comes in the form of Mayday Parker, his baby girl. According to the art book, Peter is a stay-at-home dad. He's living his best life as being a stay-at-home dad, which I think is really cute, and you can see his excitement about being a father that I've seen that some people were annoyed at, but honestly, I think it's very in character for him, especially as somebody who went from I don't want kids to being absolutely infatuated with his child and being fascinated with everything that she does. I think it's a cool and a cute character arc that Peter B had gone through. Where we left him in Across the Spider-Verse is he, along with Mayday, joins Gwen's band that she puts together to go and rescue Miles. And this section on Peter B is going to be a little short because I think the most important and interesting parts about Peter B in this film are his relationships with Miguel and with Miles. So that will be an extension of this segment later.
Miguel, as a father of a daughter and the son of a mother...
Yeah, actually, stop talking.
Okay, duly noted.
Jessica Drew is the Spider-Woman of Earth 332. She rolls up on her motorcycle with coolness, confidence, and strength. She takes no prisoners and is no nonsense. Unlike most spider people, she doesn't live a double life and always tells it like it is. She is a fearless hero who takes out bad guys on her motorcycle while pregnant. So Jessica Drew, at least from what I can tell from just being in fandom spaces at the time that the film dropped, people either love her and think she's iconic or they do not like her because of her relationship with Gwen, which will be addressed. But I think the people who don't like her don't really take into account Jessica Drew's character, like what she's for and everything like that, because it's very clearly said in the film. It's not like subtext or anything. We know exactly what Jess thinks and why she thinks it. And this card, as well as some of the sources I looked at, will go in more in depth with that. So where we meet her in the film is she pulls up in the coolest motorcycle and outfit to fight the Vulture along with Miguel, and she's just shown to be incredibly cool. Gwen also knows that, and she is immediately infatuated with her as a person. So in Raising a Hero, which is one of the Blu-ray features, Issa Rae, who was the voice actress for Jessica Drew, says Jessica Drew, wants to make sure that the world that she brings her child into is a safe one, which further explains why she is the way she is and why she isn't willing to go back on things that she says or compromise in certain ways. More on that later, like with most things here. Where we leave her is she, Miguel, Ben Reilly, they all go to get Miles. What's interesting about this is she isn't as headstrong, I would say, in this particular part. She seems more hesitant, which is because when Miguel forcibly sends Gwen home, you see it on her face that she's like, this has gone way too far. But she doesn't step in, but she acknowledges that. And so it's most likely also the reason why she lets Gwen go into the portal to go to Earth 42 instead of stopping her.
Nope. No. That's kind of cute. Oh no.
Margo is a character that we don't really get to see a ton of in Across the Spider-Verse, but I'm certain that we will be seeing a ton of her in Across the Spider-Verse. She does not have a character card in the Blu-ray, so no description for her, but where we meet her in Across the Spider-Verse, she's working alongside LYLA as one of the head techs in the Spider Society. We all know that spider people tend to be very smart with sciences and that type of thing. Margo is no exception. She's important to bring up because, skipping a little little bit ahead to where we leave her. She is in the spider band with Gwen and everybody else. According to the art book, she is the same age as Miles. Her world is digital and full of digital bad guys, so she fights crimes virtually, hence the virtual avatar that she's using to be within the Spider Society. According to Powers, he says, she, meaning Margo, finds herself conflicted about her job after she meets newcomer Miles Morales. So Miles seems to be the catalyst for people realizing that they're living in a shitty working environment, and I think that's really good. That's really cool. That Miles just shows up and he's like, I want to save my dad. I want to be Spider-Man and do my own thing. Miguel's like, absolutely not. Everyone else is like, oh, there's something wrong with that guy. So Miles just has that effect on people. It's also mentioned in the art book. I mean, it's obvious in the film, but it's just funny to see it written out that she finds Miles kind of cute. They obviously have a, like, you know, some type of attraction towards each other, or at least, like, chemistry with each other in the film. And I feel like the main reason that was included is to showcase that Gwen does like Miles because she is jealous of that little interaction that the two of them have. Margo herself has a really cool design, and like the whole idea of a virtual avatar is incredible. I'm just excited to see Margo working with everybody else and where that might take her as a character. And we know that she is the reason why Miles is allowed to escape, because she hesitates stopping the go home machine because she sees Miles and she sees that kind of desperation, that kind of pleading look on his face. I feel like that was the moment she's like, yeah, I can't work with Miguel, or I can't be a part of whatever is harming him.
The next couple characters, I combined them into one section, is Miles G and Uncle Aaron. Where we meet them is in, honestly, one of the most insane parts of the film for me, because they talk about this in the director and filmmaker's commentary, but unless you're watching the film very, very closely, and if you're watching it for the first time in theaters like I was, you probably weren't. Not that you weren't paying attention, but it's like you're so caught up in the emotions and in like the insanity of what just happened, of Miles escaping the Spider Society and him going through the go home machine as Miguel is like chasing him down and everyone's chasing him down. You're so caught up in that, as well as the emotional turmoil that Miles is going through as he's running back to what he believes is his home, when you have all of this music and voice lines from like people telling him certain things, juxtaposed with Gwen going to Miles's room and hearing the conversation that's happening between Jeff and Rio. You're not gonna pay attention to the fact that these two environments are completely different. At one point, it stops raining, I think, in Miles's actual universe, but for some reason, our brains, when we're watching films, we like to create a gap in stuff that doesn't make sense. Like, why would it be raining in one location and not raining in another if they are the same spot? So in our minds, we kind of merge the two and are like, okay, they're in the same spot when they're not. We meet Uncle Aaron first when he comes through the door. It's like, oh, damn, that is not, we are somewhere we are not supposed to be, because everyone knows that Miles's Uncle Aaron died in the first Spider-Verse movie. So to see Uncle Aaron alive is like completely wrong. And Uncle Aaron in this universe, whatever he is doing with Miles G, is able to provide money to help Rio, who has to pick up shifts at the hospital and that type of thing, because they're no longer a duo household now that Jeff's dead, presumably murdered, if we're doing a direct parallel between what happened to Uncle Aaron in Miles's actual universe. This universe is Jeff, if that makes sense. They're kind of like swapped, right? Uncle Aaron is immediately suspicious of our Miles. He knows that isn't his Miles, and he gets Miles onto the roof, the same roof that 1610's Miles' father, Jeff, was having his congratulation party. It's a nice contrast to see such a warm environment of Jeff having all of his family and friends around celebrating him, and then just seeing that really gritty, fenced off helicopters flying over the same location, but in a completely different circumstance. And then soon afterwards, we meet Miles G. Morales, aka this world's Prowler. It seems that Miles is in a completely bad situation. It's very sinister, no pun intended for the Sinister Six that I'll talk about later. Miles is like, hey,
I have to go home, and Miles G is like, seemingly that he doesn't care. Like, why should he care? And it's just a very stress-inducing scene for both our Miles and for us to watch. But I think one thing that kind of made me feel like, okay, maybe things will be okay, is the labeling of that Uncle Aaron and Miles G as vigilantes, which is said in the art book. A vigilante is someone who is fighting the law, right? Or fighting bad guys. They aren't necessarily like good guys, but because they aren't looking to do the right thing by the quote unquote right means, you know, they do stuff like by any means necessary. And that's exactly what Miles G and this Uncle Aaron is. Thompson says, in this alternate reality, the Sinister Six have been able to flourish and take over the world. Criminality runs rampant, says Thompson. We wanted to create a world where it felt like Aaron and Miles G. Morales of Earth 42, this reality's counterpart to Miles Morales, are the only heroes. So if Miles G and this Uncle Aaron are heroes, not to say that they're going to be all buddy-buddy and like laugh about it later in the beginning of Beyond the Spider-Verse, which is a possibility, but you know, that's kind of a cheap fake out. But that means that there's a little bit of pressure off my shoulders that Miles might die in this world at the hands of Uncle Aaron and Miles G, if those two are vigilantes who are trying to fight the Sinister Six. I will talk about this at the end of this video where I discuss where I think Beyond the Spider-Verse is going, but just a little sneak peek into that is I think the reason why Miles G is like, why would I let you do that? Like, why would I let you leave and go rescue your father? That's not our father. Is that maybe he is looking for an opportunity in Miles to be like, okay, well, maybe this kid can help us defeat the Sinister Six. Since he's here and is me, he has to be capable of doing something, right? So maybe that'll be what happens. Maybe there's a thing, like a team up that I'll talk about later. Also, it is worth saying that I know Miguel says it in the film, but the reason why Miles G and Uncle Aaron's world is so, like, terrible is because the spider that bit Miles wasn't supposed to be in that dimension. It was supposed to bite somebody in Earth 42. And whether that was Miles G, Uncle Aaron, or anybody else, I guess it doesn't technically matter because it didn't happen. And that's why there are cartels like the Sinister Six running rampant around New York. So I also wanted to say that Miles 1610 uncle was the Prowler, and Miles G is the Prowler while his uncle isn't. So it seems like they have this tag team relationship where Miles G is like dripped out in these incredibly cool mechanical outfit that he uses to fight crime, whichever way he decides to do that. To look at these two, at least the glimpse that we get into their relationships and compare it to how Miles 1610 and Uncle Aaron's relationship is kind of like crazy to think about, because Miles G's situation is completely more serious and the stakes are higher because, I mean, look at the world. Look at how it's drawn. Look at how it's animated. Look at the cityscape. Stuff is terrible. So I'm sure he and Uncle Aaron had a relationship sort of like 1610 Miles did before Jeff died. And then afterwards, however he became the Prowler, stuff just got more serious.
How's this going?
Now, son, what have we always said?
On time means 5 minutes early.
I know.
I don't think there can be any argument about just how much Miles, Rio, and Jeff care about each other. Their relationship is one of the most important relationships that we see in this film, and it's incredibly heartbreaking to be faced with the possibility that that relationship could be destroyed by the death / the murder of Jeff at the hands of the Spot. According to Kemp Powers, Miles and Rio have always been super close, and Miles's parents are his closest friends. It's not a secret. You can see it throughout the film at the parent-teacher conference that they have with the college counselor and at the party. Even though they're arguing, it's out of a place of concern for Miles and what he's doing that they don't know because he's hiding the fact that he's Spider-Man from them. And it's similar to the way that Gwen's relationship has been like chiseled down because of her lying to her father and that type of thing with Miles and his parents. We also see an alternate reality with Miles G. Morales and his mother without Jeff. And just back to that idea that this could be reality, like they're tight-knit, their best friends, like familial relationship could be destroyed, is really sad because it's not only shown in this film, but it's also in the first film. We get more of Miles and Jeff in Into the Spider-Verse, and we get more of Rio and Miles in Across the Spider-Verse, and you can tell just how much they care about each other, and it's really concerning to see that. And that conversation that Gwen overhears when she is in Miles's room about how concerned Rio and Jeff are about Miles, and that conversation that Jeff has with Spider-Man before about letting him spread his wings, just goes to show that they are also trying to, well, it's their first time being parents too, so they're trying to approach this in ways that they haven't had to approach it before, and trying to be more open in how they approach Miles and trying to get Miles to confide in them. And Miles is really worried about revealing his identity as Spider-Man. We see this in the beginning of Miles' story, where we have that little like imagination scene where he's like, Mom, Dad, I'm Spider-Man, and they're like something along the lines of, we're totally fine with you keeping a secret and lying to us for over a year. And that's one of Miles' main concerns. He doesn't want to lie to his parents. Like Kemp Powers says, they're his closest friends. He doesn't want to, but he feels like he has to, and that's creating a lot of emotions and like hard decisions on both sides, because Rio and Jeff want to be there for Miles. They can only do so much if they don't know what he's going through. So that is something that we unfortunately have to see. One thing I found incredibly concerning in the art book is this quote: "Things get even more complicated when Jeff's increasingly cordial relationship with Spider-Man, also Miles, gets him a promotion at work. When Miles later learns that his father's promotion will lead to Jeff's death, he becomes increasingly determined to save him from his fate, which puts him at odds with his own friends." Now, when I read this when my art book first came in the mail last year, I was like, this just made this situation 10 times worse, because it's one thing for Miles to basically be the reason why the Spot is doing what he does, not necessarily the Collider thing, because honestly I'm putting that on Peter B, but it's more so the whole villain of the week thing. But then again, that was something that has been going on with Octavius, blah blah blah. But it's more so the fact that if Miles as Spider-Man wasn't working well with Jeff, then Jeff wouldn't have been promoted to become captain, which means that, because I know it's a canon event supposed to happen, whatever, but if Miles knew that his relationship as Spider-Man with his dad is the reason why his dad's becoming captain, which consequently is also the reason why he is destined to die, I feel like that would just destroy him, because then it's like, oh, it's your fault in so many different ways. He's being told that by Miguel, it's your fault that Pav's world's falling apart. It's your fault that we're dealing with all of this nonsense because you're an anomaly. It's your fault that Rip Peter died. Then it's like, oh, it's your fault the Spot's a thing. And then it's also your fault that your father is even in the position to become captain in the first place. It's really something. I also think some of the most emotional parts of this film come from Rio and Jeff, and I keep thinking about, again, that talk that Rio has with Miles, and it's just a very intimate and devastating and like heartbreaking moment, because you know Miles wants to confide in his mother, and you know Rio is ready to hear it, but Miles just can't get himself to, and it's really sad when we look back at that part of the film and we know that as far as this film, that is the last time that Miles is going to see his parents until whatever showdown happens in Beyond the Spider-Verse, is also very sad. To go from something that was more lighthearted in Into the Spider-Verse, you know, like, say I love you back, son, those like shenanigans, to going to something more serious with your dad could die, your family as you know it could be destroyed, is really something. And in typical Spider-Man fashion, Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Miles Morales, any iteration always has to suffer, and this is just peak suffering for Miles here.
That's exactly what you are. You're just a kid who has no idea what he's doing!
I don't have to be the first person to tell you that Miguel O'Hara does not like Miles Morales. He hates him, and it's very clear through his behavior, through how he speaks to Miles, and it escalates in that final showdown when Miles is in the go home machine and Miguel's literally ripping and ripping and ripping at the barrier to try to get to Miles, and that animal instinct kind of kicks in when he's on all fours with his claws and everything. The film frames it as Miguel being upset that Miles was the first anomaly, which led down a long line of a bunch of anomalies that he had to deal with and messes that he had to fix because he decided to take it upon himself to deal with these anomalies. It makes it seem like, oh, Miles is at fault because Miguel has to do all this work. But this is something I've thought since last year, but I've never put it out there. I think it's way deeper than Miles just being the first anomaly. I think the real reason Miguel is so angry and so resentful towards Miles is because Miles got away with something that Miguel never could. When Miles got bit by that spider that he wasn't supposed to, and Rip Peter died, instead of Miles's world falling apart, it just did a course correction. And this is what I've been referring to it as, like a course correction. So we have this Peter Parker who's supposed to be Spider-Man. And when he dies and Miles gets bitten by the spider, he is taking the place of Rip Peter. So the world doesn't fall apart, at least in my opinion, because the world still has a Spider-Man. The world has a Spider-Man because Miles becomes Rip Peter's replacement. So everything goes on as normal in the canon. Uncle Aaron dies in place of Uncle Ben. Miles's dad is police captain who was supposed to get killed. All of that. And it drives Miguel insane to think about how he went to another universe to replace himself, his own self. It wasn't like he was going and replacing somebody else. He went to replace himself, somebody who was biologically him, with his daughter, and his world fell apart. So for Miguel to see Miles, who was a living, breathing example of something that he was not allowed to do, it's like salt in the wound. He's literally face to face with somebody who broke canon and nothing bad happened. But Miguel has to live with the fact that his daughter disintegrated in his arms. That entire world was gone, and he has to deal with that for the rest of his life. But Miles Morales gets to be Spider-Man and gets to continue his life normally with his world and his family, and Miguel doesn't. So I think that knowing of Miles was already bad enough, but seeing him just made that boil over. And so when Miles, again, this time deliberately, is like, no, I am going to break canon, I am going to save my father, that's when Miguel really goes off and is like, you're a mistake, you weren't even supposed to be here, you are an anomaly. And the fact that Miles gets to say, no, I'm going to save my dad, no, I'm going to be Spider-Man, but Miguel can't say, no, I'm going to have a family, I'm going to have my daughter, that is what is really pissing him off. That is what's really making him angry. Miles is just a personification of everything Miguel was denied and couldn't do. And it's like when you were a kid and you got in trouble for doing something, but somebody else, or like your sibling or a classmate or whatever, does the same thing and they don't get in trouble for it and they somehow get rewarded for it. It's kind of like that, except like on a bigger scale. And it's not Miles's fault for anything that's happened, but to Miguel, he does not care. He's just angry, and you see it in how he behaves and how he takes it out on Gwen too after Miles goes through the machine, and he's like, no, I'm going to stop this. He is just very salty, very resentful, very full of hatred for Miles for getting away with something that he never ever ever could have.
I'm gonna take everything from you, like I took everything from you.
With Miles in the spot, we're going to start out with a quote by Amy Pascal. She says, "The best villains in any story have similar problems to what the main character has. Spot is literally a character full of black holes, and he's trying to fill those holes, figuratively, throughout the movie. His path is similar to Miles's, and that's what makes his story so resonant." So, like I said in the Spot's character section, the reason why he is so upset about being called the villain of the week and not being taken seriously is because he had the exact same thing happen to him with Dr. Octavius, and his relationship with Miles is just an extension of that. So in the film, like when it begins, we don't really take the Spot seriously, and that's all done on purpose so that when he does become a real threat, it's more shocking and more serious to us, and also to Miles, because he did not expect the Spot to be someone who would have been that big of an issue. And like to reiterate, his vendetta against Miles is less about Miles himself and more about his past issues that he has had with Dr. Octavius. So in this film, we see that parallel between Miles and the Spot kind of being similar position like Amy Pascal was saying, and Miles is dealing with being a spider person, being this new thing, and of course being taken seriously, which he isn't, because when it comes to Miguel doesn't take Miles seriously for his own reasons, but Miles wasn't seen as someone who could have joined the Spider Society because of him being an anomaly, so he's not really being taken seriously with that, and that's frustrating to him. So he's constantly having to feel like he's proving himself to Gwen and to Miguel and to the people in the Spider Society. And we see a little bit of this, or a little more of this, in Miguel Calling, that deleted scene where Miles is verbally trying to prove himself, and it's less subtle than it is in the movie, but Miles is constantly having to be like, hey, before he knows the reason why he wasn't allowed to join the Spider Society, but having to constantly say, hey, I am worthy enough to be in the Spider Society, especially because Gwen is like, it's just this small elite force, because she's trying not to make him feel bad by how big it is, and Miles is just like, well, I have all these powers, like I should be able to join the Spider Society. So in that way, he's similar to the Spot. And I think Miles realizes this as the film goes on, that all the Spot wants is to just be taken seriously in the same way that he does. So he tries to fix it by saying, no, you are a formidable villain, right guys? When they're in the Super Collider in Mumbattan, and the Spot is basically like, I'm not hearing any of that. I'm gonna keep getting stronger and stronger till I can be someone who is a worthy opponent for you. Even though Miles and the Spot are very similar in terms of wanting to be taken seriously and all of that, it's kind of sad to think about how Miles has such a strong support system behind him and the Spot doesn't. It's very apparent when Rio is telling Miles before she gives him her blessing to go off and find Gwen that Miles shouldn't let anybody ever tell him that he doesn't belong, and to know that he's loved, everything like that. And the Spot does not have that support system. Instead of finding it, he creates it for himself. He doesn't need Miles's approval about him not being a villain of the week or anything along those lines. Instead, he has decided and taken it upon himself to become something that is terrifying and is something that is powerful, that he doesn't need anyone's permission or anyone's validation on who he is. The Spot clearly doesn't feel like he belongs, because even he says like his family has shunned him because of the way he looks and all of that. He doesn't need it. He is going to create it for himself. And there's another parallel with that and Miles, because when he says like, nah, I'm gonna do my own thing, that's him saying, I don't care if the entire world is against me. If I know deep within my heart that something is right, and that something being preventing his dad from dying, then come at me. It's similar to the Spot where he is gonna do what he thinks he needs to do. And even though we consider Miles our protagonist and the Spot our antagonist, they really do have a ton in common. And I think with that in mind, their final showdown, however that ends, is going to be really, really crazy.
Miles!
Dude!
Don't be afraid of my friend Miguel. He just looks scary. He's got no bite.
We have a very sharp contrast in Miles and Peter B's relationship from Into the Spider-Verse to Across the Spider-Verse, because in the first one, we have Peter B trying to figure out how to be a mentor and him kind of sucking at it, but then he and Miles have this bond that benefits both him and Peter. The reason why Peter B has a child in the first place, and he tells Miles this, is because of his interactions with him, and it made him realize, hey, I do actually want a kid, because that was the main reason why he and his version of MJ broke up, was because MJ wanted kids and he didn't. So through interacting with Miles, Peter B finds a different version of himself that he's better for, and he's kind of indebted to Miles in that way. Peter B doesn't have a huge role in this film, but when he and Miles do interact, it's very potent, especially the last couple scenes that we see those two together. So let's just start with the first time that we see them together. So we have already left Miles's world and we've already been reconnected with Gwen. We've met Hobie, we've met Pav, and everybody else. And Peter B swings into the room, or walks into the room, whatever, with Mayday. And Miles is so happy to see him because Peter gave him the confidence to take that leap of faith and become Spider-Man. Because if you guys remember, Miles was really, really struggling with that. And it was Peter's pep talk that Miles was replaying in his head when he leapt off that building and gained his confidence, his initial confidence to be Spider-Man. So with Miles, he's just very happy to see Peter B, just being able to see an old friend again after that longing and wanting to be with them and finally getting to be with them. But of course, it doesn't last very long when Miguel sicks the Spider Society onto Miles, and Peter B is one of the spider people who are chasing him. He and Miles end up in this kind of a quiet moment that the creators of the film spoke about how they felt like they really needed this moment in the film because that chase scene, like there's just so many iterations of that chase scene, like shorter versions, longer versions, and they didn't want it to be just so crazy where it's just like constantly Miles running. They just needed like a little pause, like a little cool down moment, and that's where Peter and Miles's conversation happens, and it doesn't really go well because LYLA is like, oh yeah, Spider-Man, we have your location, and so Miles feels betrayed. But before that moment happens, Peter B is essentially telling Miles it's crazy to run, and of course to Miles it's just like baffling that the people who gave him his confidence in the first place, the people who he wanted to be with for so long, wouldn't back him up. And I can see and understand his frustration as well as other people's frustrations that they've discussed about, like, why didn't Peter B do anything? And Jake Johnson, who voices Peter B, actually gives us a little bit of insight into what Peter was thinking in one of the Blu-ray exclusives called I'm Gonna Do My Own Thing, Interdimensional Destiny. Johnson says, I love that they put Miles in a corner. For Peter, it's really hard to advise him, Miles, not to want to save his father. Peter also is a little bit old school and knows how it works to be Spider-Man. So it's not like Peter B doesn't want to tell Miles, kid, just go after what you think is right, but it's that seniority of being a spider person, just knowing how the world works for them, that he is kind of stuck in that way, kind of like, oh, it's just an inevitable thing. Like, it's not like he's completely Miguel, where he's like, no, you can't do this thing. He's more understanding, but it's not really helpful to Miles in that position. And instead of voicing that to Miles, he kind of just tries to advise him, it's crazy to run, maybe don't do that, but Miles isn't hearing none of that. So his relationship with a lot of his old friends from the first film doesn't really have a happy place because of this whole going against canon events thing. And it's really sad to see Miles seeing the people that he trusts just not take his side. And it's not like Peter B doesn't care for Miles, but like Johnson said, he's just old school, and so he's kind of like, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so we might as well just like not run.
Squashed. Just don't enlist till you know what war you're fighting.
This section won't be super long because I kind of spoke about these two in different sections, but I really do enjoy Miles and Hobie's dynamic. It is funny. I mean, it is played off for comedy. Miles' jealousy towards Hobie, which isn't really founded, in my opinion, because there's nothing going on there. More on that later. But Miles is younger than Hobie, like significantly younger than Hobie. And it's kind of interesting if you view Hobie as like a future Miles, not like Miles is going to follow exactly into Hobie's footsteps, but more so Hobie as a mentor, somebody that Miles can look up to or at least rely on in a similar way to Gwen and Jess, because Hobie is the one who helps Miles utilize his powers better so that he's able to escape Miguel and the Spider Society initially. And then also because, even though Miles is not aware of this right now, that Hobie is the one who's been secretly grabbing this and that from the Spider Society and creating the interdimensional watches that are eventually used for the Spider Band to go and either save Miles or be reunited with him. We don't know exactly, since the film has been postponed until 2027. I just think like their dynamic throughout the film is really funny, but then also on a more serious note, Hobie is aware of the type of person Miguel is, and he also is the one who tells Miles, like, hey, you don't want to be in all of this. And Miles kind of takes it in like a jealous type of way. Not that Hobie's jealous of Miles, but Miles is more so like, oh, this guy doesn't want me here. I have a crush on Gwen. He has something going on with Gwen, yada, yada, yada. And that's where his jealousy comes in. But I feel like Hobie is a perfect figure for Miles to see, because Miles takes it a bit further than Hobie, because Hobie kind of does stuff a little bit on the down low, even though he like verbally pokes fun at Miguel. But Miles's whole conclusion he comes to is, no, I'm gonna do my own thing. You can't tell me what to do. I'm not gonna be restricted in these rules. I'm gonna save my father. And Hobie has always been, at least the way he's been shown in this film, he is like in a similar way. Like, oh, I don't follow rules. I don't follow establishments. I don't follow leaders. I do my own thing. And even though it pisses Miguel off to no end, that is just Hobie. There's a parallel between the two of them that I hope we get to see more, and then I hope Miles understands, because of course Miles is like, oh yeah, Hobie Hobie is my ally because he's helped me in these situations, but even more so, Hobie and Miles are kind of parallels in that defiant way. It's really cool to see that Hobie is so instrumental in Miles's escape and then whatever will be happening in Beyond the Spider-Verse. I mentioned that Miles and Hobie have a lot in common because Miles is becoming more of a Hobie-like character as the story goes on. Him realizing that he can make his own decisions and not go along with what the Spider Society is telling him he has to do is directly related to Hobie and Hobie helping in Miles's defiance, as I discussed before. So if you think about Miles as a spectrum, like his character as a spectrum, you have him in the middle, and then you have Hobie on the right. So Miles is leaning more towards the right, and then you have a character like Pav who's on the left side. Not that he isn't defiant in the same way the other two are. We haven't exactly seen much of that aside from Pav joining the Spider Band to go and rescue Miles. But more so, what I mean by that is that Pav is a early version of Miles, if that makes sense, because he's so new to the Spider Society and so new into being a spider person. Power says he's, meaning Pav, a few years younger than Miles, and his happy, positive disposition can probably even rub Miles the wrong way. He also goes on to mention in the art book that Pav has already lost his Uncle Ben variant at this point, and so when I mentioned that Pav hasn't experienced the horrors yet, I didn't necessarily mean he didn't experience that initial canon event. It's more so like all the other terrible stuff that happens after an Uncle Ben-like character passes away in a spider person's life. When they meet, Pav is obviously a very happy-go-lucky character, and that doesn't mean that he's like naive. It just means he's a very positive person, and to Miles that rubs him the wrong way because he comes in as a more experienced spider person than the last time we see him, and he sees a less experienced spider person in Pav, and he is allowed in the Spider Society. So to Miles, he's like, okay, what is this guy doing that I'm not, and why is he allowed in the Spider Society but I'm not? And to him, he doesn't know yet about the whole anomaly thing, but to see Pav being like, oh yeah, being Spider-Man's so easy, it's so great, that obviously rubs him the wrong way. And they meet in Mumbattan, obviously, and Pav's first act is saving Miles and Gwen after the Spot attacks them, and that is paralleled later when Pav goes to help Miles with the rest of the Spider-Man. So Pav's just a helper. That's a cool thing about him. And Miles can't stay too mad at Pav because his happy-go-lucky nature is just him. It might rub him the wrong way. It might make him be like, oh my god, oh brother, this guy. But Pav is not a bad person. He's not somebody that is actively against Miles, so he will become Miles's ally in a way that Miles isn't really seeing at this point. And of course, one of Pav's main interactions with Miles is teasing him and Gwen about their palpable romantic tension or whatnot, and that I'm sure doesn't help Miles, who's trying to play it off and be like this cool person who's kind of like nonchalant in reference to Gwen. I don't think Pav blames Miles at all for the current state of Mumbattan, even though it's technically his fault. I don't think he would have sat there and let Inspector Singh get killed by the rubble if he could have physically gone and helped him. And that's different from Miguel, who's like, oh, Pav's world's falling apart because you disrupted a canon event, yada yada yada. So the fact that Miles has an entire society full of spiders chasing after him and feeling rightfully betrayed by those closest to him, like Peter B and Gwen, the fact that Miles has characters like Pav who are still in his corner, who despite having his world fall apart is still willing to go and physically be there and help him is just great. Miles has so many great people around him that are there to help him and support him, and Pav is no different from that. In case I didn't emphasize this before, Miles is thrown off by Pav's demeanor and also his presence in the Spider Society because he is a newer spider person, and that I'm sure doesn't help with his self-esteem because Miles has spent the last movie and also majority of this movie trying to prove himself to others in the Spider Society. So the fact that he has to work so hard to be like, yeah, I can be a valuable asset to the Spider Society, unbeknownst to him that it's because he's an anomaly, not because he's not capable of saving people or saving world. And Pav can be Spider-Man for 5 or so months and still join the Spider Society. That's just another nail in the Miles self-esteem coffin where he's like, okay, there's kind of like an us versus them thing going on. Why do they get to be part of the Spider Society and hang out and be together? I have to be alone, and nobody came to see me until Gwen did. That's another thing that kind of makes him look at Pav a little differently. And then, of course, a lot of the comedy with the chai tea thing and all of that happens between Miles and Pav. And I'm excited. I know I say this a lot, but I'm excited to see more of those two's relationship because we see a lot of Pav and Hobie And there isn't a Pav and Hobie section because essentially all I'd say is that they're best friends and they like hanging out around each other. Same with Pav and Gwen. Like they work together, they've worked together previously to the Mumbattan meeting and everything like that. I've been itching to talk about Miles and Gwen's relationship since I started scripting this video in May. But before I can talk about them, I have to talk about Gwen and Miguel. People always talk about the dynamic between Miles and Miguel, which is extremely important and it's one of the main conflicts in the film. But people overlook Miguel and Gwen, and I think their relationship and their dynamic provides a lot of backstory and reasons as to why Gwen acts the way that she does. There's a intersection between Gwen's relationship with her father, George, and Gwen's relationship with Miguel, because the parallels there crazy. But before I can talk about Gwen and Miguel, I have to talk about Gwen and George Stacy. Gwen and her father's relationship is pretty strained when we meet them in the film because Gwen is pushing people away, her friends, her father, because one, she's upset is still not over having not been in contact with Miles especially, and having nobody that she can talk to about being a spider person and nobody that can relate to her. So she's dealing with that, but then she's also dealing with the fact that her best friend Peter was murdered and she as Spider-Woman is being framed for that murder. And the person who was heading a manhunt against her ever since this happened is her own father. So there's a lot that is on Gwen's conscience and is on her shoulders that she has to deal with. Her relationship with her father is not improving because she's keeping so much from him that she can't tell him because she is afraid. And we see this when Gwen is forced to reveal herself as Spider-Woman to her father because she's out of web fluid and her father is pointing a gun at her. She's trying to appeal to him, appeal to his humanity, appeal to him as her father. Like, hey, I didn't kill Peter. And according to the screenplay, his mind is just everywhere. He's trying to deal with the fact that it's his daughter who he's been trying to hunt down this entire time, but then at the same time, that's his daughter, but he's having doubts about whether, did she kill Peter? Is my daughter a murderer? He doesn't know, and that's why he is, according to the creators, he takes the easy way out when he confronts Gwen as Spider-Woman. What does he know best at this moment is just to be a cop. So he's like, well, I'm just gonna take you in, and his mind is all over the place. So for Gwen, that is an insane moment in the worst case scenario for how her coming out as Spider-Woman could have gone. At this point, Gwen's relationships with father figures is not in a good headspace. And I will talk about this part in Gwen and George's section, mostly about the aftermath of this moment and of Gwen leaving and how that is resolved. But for the sake of Gwen and Miguel, I'll leave Gwen and George right here.
Do you know for certain what happens if he breaks the cannon?
Do you want to find out?
Miguel is the reason why Gwen is able to escape her situation with her father, not confront that, and to get away from the whole thing. So they are interesting as a dynamic because Miguel takes the role of a father figure, and people mostly talk about like a daughter-parental relationship when it comes to Jess and Gwen, but according to the screenplay, the reason that Miguel even lets Gwen come with them is because, and something, is that a fatherly instinct? Kicks in, barely. Yeah, well, join the club, is what Miguel says. Miguel tosses Gwen a watch. So him watching that scene between Gwen and George and putting himself in the place of George as a father, not having his own daughter, and I know the screenplay says barely, but hey, barely is still there. He is like, okay, let me help her out, right? If Miguel sees it that way, who's to say that Gwen doesn't see it that way? I'm not saying Gwen sees Miguel as a father figure, but he is a placeholder of a father figure, an authoritarian figure in this moment and in later moments. Gwen is not confronting and is not able to confront her father because she's not in the same physical space as him. But with Miguel, you can tell that Gwen is traumatized, obviously, from her experience with her father, which is why she essentially has to walk on eggshells with Miguel. And in one part of the screenplay, after Gwen begs Jess to let her go to Mumbattan and try to get the spot, Jess says, if Miguel finds out that I let you come, to go to 610 to visit Miles. Gwen says, "Don't tell Miguel. What if he sends me home?" That's the last thing Gwen wants. Gwen is afraid of being sent home, and I have a feeling like that has been hung over her head, whether verbally or just like implied, that hey, if you screw up, if you mess up, we're going to send you home. And Gwen is really between a rock and a hard place here, with having to walk on eggshells around Miguel and not screw up and mess up so that she isn't sent home to a situation that is far from ideal, and having to basically try to push that to the back of her mind. And that's why you see her when she first is swinging around the city with Miles, that she isn't trying to think about it. She's making all of these friends in the Spider Society or whatever, and she's deliberately using them as distractions from thinking about what happened with her father. And if she doesn't do what she's told, and if she steps out of line, she gets sent home, which is exactly what Miguel did to her when she had said to Miguel that maybe you weren't hard enough on him. She's being sarcastic, and Miguel uses her as a scapegoat to be like, look, Miles escaping was your fault. I'm going to send you home. And that is, once again, the worst case scenario for Gwen. It's terrifying to have to be sent back to a situation, to a home space where you don't feel, not necessarily safe, but you don't feel comfortable, and she's forced to confront something that she's been avoiding for months. Also, to add, not only is Gwen essentially being blackmailed, like, hey, if you don't follow the rules, we're going to send you home, she also trusted and believed in Miguel as a leader, as a quote father, as like a person in a father figure role, and he betrayed her too, because him sending her home was a way of him exercising his power over her and his authority. That's terrifying, because as she says, we're supposed to be the good guys. Obviously, Gwen, when she joined the Spider Society, was like, oh yeah, this is great. I can help out and I can be distracted and whatever. Although she had that fear of being sent home hung over her head, she still believed in the cause of the Spider Society, and to see firsthand how Miguel was treating Miles and then her made her kind of take the Hobie route, even though it wasn't voluntary, of screw your authority and you. There is one deleted scene that is included in the Blu-ray called Miguel Calling, and we get more insight into how the dynamic of the Spider Society might have been before Miles was introduced to them. And although it's not canon, because this scene is replaced by a more contained scene where Miles is invisible and never reveals himself to Gwen before she goes through the portal, we do see Miguel in a little more of a less serious, more like lighthearted, more as lighthearted as Miguel can be with Gwen and everybody else. So this could have possibly been how the team dynamic went. So to see Miguel like this, and then to turn a complete 180 and become so violent and desperate, must have been a real whiplash for Gwen. So now that we have that out of the way, and now that we know about Gwen's fear of being sent home, her fear of stepping out of line so that she isn't sent home, and her dynamic with her father and Miguel as parallels, now we can get to Gwen and Miles.
That's different.
Yeah? How's that?
I don't know. You and me,
we're the same. In the important ways.
This section is the only part of the video where I'm reading directly from a script and not just going off of bullet points that I've written, and it's also the reason why this video essay has taken so long to come out. I really wanted to make sure that I'm discussing Miles and Gwen's relationship accurately and as fully as I can without going completely overboard, especially given fan reactions to the two of them in 2023 and still in 2024 when I first started working on this video, and in 2025. I first want to start with explaining why I organized the video essay the way I did with Gwen and her relationships with her father and Miguel first, before I had to get into Miles and Gwen. It's very important to me that I cover character motivation when talking about individuals and their relationships, which is why I was being fair when talking about Miguel despite me not personally liking him, and I think it's also incredibly important with a character like Gwen. To quickly reiterate, since we just went over this, Gwen was being blackmailed by Miguel. Miguel witnesses the most, if not the entire scene between Gwen and George from the shadows before he jumps in. He saw how distressed and helpless she was and was the one to stop George from potentially pulling the trigger. Now, whether you believe believe George was going to or not, he had a gun pointed at Gwen, and she definitely was afraid that that was a possibility. So Miguel, with some prodding from Jess, lets Gwen come with them to escape that situation. He knew full well the type of life awaiting Gwen at home, yet do as I say or go home was his mentality with her. Knowing this, it makes the first 30 minutes or so we spend with Gwen at the beginning of the film even more heartbreaking in relation to her and Miles. Seeing just how much she missed him, his reflection in the subway windows, their picture together tucked away safely in her drum, and how much he occupied her thoughts to the point where he was the first place her mind went to when she first meets Miguel. She asks him if the watch can go to any dimension, and obviously she's thinking about Miles. And knowing that she can't see him must have been torture. Gwen says when she's talking to Miles, when he's bringing up what would it take for me to get a watch and asking all these questions about the Spider Society, and Gwen is saying, you know, if it were up to me, she would have visited him sooner if they didn't have such a tight leash on her and where she could go. It just makes the whole thing even sadder. So this, along with the disaster with George, is why Gwen throws herself into the missions and uses her new friends as distractions. I genuinely think it's disingenuous to say that Gwen doesn't care about Miles, whether you agree with her decision not to tell him he's an anomaly or not. Gwen's very real fear of being forced back into a world where her own dad thinks she's a murderer and pointed a gun at her unfortunately outweighed her desire to see Miles and tell him the truth. It's easier for Miles as a character to be so stubbornly defiant than it is for Gwen given their individual circumstances. I also wanted to mention that this isn't verbalized, it's mainly in body language, but Gwen is in awe of Miles when he stands up to Miguel, both figuratively and literally, on the train in a way that she couldn't until she eventually does at the end of the film, and Miguel does exactly what he's been threatening to do to her this entire time. And might I add that if Gwen had gone to see Miles before, when the spot wasn't at large and she didn't have an excuse to be in Earth 1610, she probably would have been sent home much sooner with no means of getting back. So I don't fault her for not doing that. Miles's defiance is something that she truly admires about him, and she alludes to this when she's talking to Rio and Jeff when she says something along the lines of, Miles has shown me that it's all possible. The real tragedy of Miles and Gwen isn't that they're from two different universes, although that's part of it. It lies in the concept of hurting someone you care deeply for. Gwen says in the voiceover at the beginning, I didn't want to hurt him, but I did. The fact that both of them are finally reunited after a year or so, pining for one another, whether you believe that's romantic or platonically, they were only reunited for a short period of time, the bliss and quiet of the meeting at the top of the Williamsburg bank building, the short moment at Jeff's party before everything unravels is also part of the tragedy. And I'm in no way saying that Miles has no right to feel betrayed or upset by the truth being kept from him. We know that Miles has had a crush on Gwen since they first met in Into the Spider-Verse, but even after that, both he and Gwen spent the same amount of time wishing they could see and be with one another again. This is what makes Gwen not telling Miles significantly worse than Peter B not telling them. They both wanted so badly to be with someone who understood them in the way that they understood each other. Even after spending months with other Spider people, it's Miles who Gwen feels the most drawn to. Even after meeting Penny, Spider-Ham, Spider-Noir, and Peter B, basically around the same time that he first met Gwen, it's Gwen Miles feels the most drawn to, if the countless sketchbook pages are anything to go off of. I said this in the Gwen section, but again, I love this film because we learn so much more about characters we were introduced to in the previous film. We get to find out just how much Gwen actually cares about Miles from this movie alone, and there seems to be this idea floating around that she doesn't care about him and that she's somehow leading him on, but there's so much evidence in this film in particular that disproves that. The sequence with self-love and the drumming scene are big ones. Gwen immediately hugging Miles when she enters his room when they first see each other, her genuine fear of him being hurt or worse after he rescues the little girl in Mumbattan, and her responding to Miles' question about what she thinks of them saving everybody afterwards. He goes, well, what do you think? And she says, what I always think, you're amazing. After rewatching the film several times, the tragedy aspect really hammers in. Who in the world would want to willingly hurt someone that they love? I don't talk much about music in this video essay because that could be an entirely different video on its own, but a lot of the lyrics in songs like Self-Love, Mona Lisa, Calling do an excellent job of outlining just how these two feel about each other. And next I wanted to read some excerpts from the screenplay that'll clear up some of that Gwen doesn't care about Miles talk, as well as explain some scenes better, or at least more in depth. Just a reminder that screenplays don't traditionally feature internal dialogue unless it's made verbal or expressed through body language, but Across the Spider-Verse screenplay does. So this is when Gwen and Miles are swinging through the city. Gwen says, oh my gosh, you'd love him. He lets me crash in his dimension sometimes. What? Miles goes, "What does that mean? You stay overnight or?" But she flies off, so light and happy it seems evasive, like she's using her new friends to avoid her old life, which I alluded to earlier. This is when they're on the top of the clock tower. He, meaning Miles, moves closer. Gwen says, "Yeah, I mean, how many people can you talk to about this stuff?" Miles says, "You don't even know." They both feel it, something between attraction and kinship. Gwen wants to say something, but isn't sure that she should. That scene, and they talk about this in the end of the Across the Spider-Verse art book, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end of this section, but there's so many non-verbal things that really make the tension and like the sadness and that inevitability so palpable and so tangible to the audience that is just perfection. The next scene is when Miles first gets to the Spider Society. He says to Margo, see you around? Margo says, "Good luck out there, man." Gwen flips Miles away from her. Jealous? I mean, that part's obvious. This is another scene on top of the clock tower. Gwen says, "You're the only friend I've ever really made after Peter died." Miles says, "Other than Hobie, right?" "That's different." "Yeah? How's that?" "I don't know. You and me, we're the same." He nailed it. It's more than attraction. In the important ways, you know? There's an inevitability to them. They can feel it. I love the use of the word inevitability because no matter what they go through, it's always going to be Miles and Gwen, and no matter how that ends, they have this connection to each other that cannot be denied. The topic of Gwen and Miles and their relationship could be its own separate video, so can dissecting the scene on the bank building alone. Christopher Miller says about that moment in a section at the end of the Across the Spider-Verse art book, "There is a sense of regret about the fact that it can never work between them, because there are forces in the universe that don't allow it to become anything more than what they have in this moment." There's more to that beautifully written section in the art book, and I highly recommend checking it out. And with the "in every other universe" comment, I always wonder about what circumstances Gwen found out about Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy's fate. If it was something that she looked into herself because of her feelings for Miles when she first joined the Spider Society, or if it's something that Miguel told her with malicious intent of keeping her away from him, or something that she just discovered by talking to other Spider people in the Spider Society. And I quickly wanted to mention Spider Sense here. I could be reading too into this, but it seems as if Miles and Gwen's Spider senses are linked in ways that other Spider people's aren't. And this could be chalked up to scene bridging, which is when two or more shots from different locations or times are similar in order to make a smooth transition. When Miles glitches for the first time in Earth 42, he and Gwen seem to have the same realization at the exact same moment. Miles is in the wrong universe. This comes in the form of Spider Sense for Gwen, but as far as I remember, and I'm perfectly fine with being corrected about this, we haven't seen Spider Sense shown in this way. We normally see it in an action sequence before something happens, or in Into the Spider-Verse when Gwen, Miles, and Peter recognize each other as Spider people. This could also be chalked up to scene bridging, but when Miles gets knocked out by Miles G, Gwen's Spider Sense goes off in Earth 1610. Soon after, Jeff and Rio start talking, so it could just be that Gwen's Spider Sense was going off because she noticed that they were also in the house. I just wanted to bring it up because if their Spider Senses are linked somehow cross dimensions in that way, I have to ask why Gwen is the only one who realized that he was in the wrong universe based on Spider Sense if it wasn't just the fact that he wasn't in the room, if that makes sense. What I really want people to take away from this section is that Miles and Gwen's relationship is complex, and so are the two of them individually. How their reconciliation, if there will be a complete or partial one, will go is up in the air, but the screen grabs that Sony shared earlier this year in 2025 gives us a little bit of an idea. I didn't mention this in the Hobie section, and in retrospect I should have, but I'll do it here. Kemp Power says in Hobie's art book section, actually lives on a canal boat, which serves as his headquarters. This is speculation, but I can see the Miles and Gwen confrontation, like the end to kind of what we were getting on the train to their last interaction in Across the Spider-Verse, happening after they escape Earth 42, or if my theory is correct about Miles helping Miles G with the Sinister Six, them just like leaving and go to Hobie's universe to reconvene and figure out the next move against Miguel, and that's where their confrontation, or when Gwen tries to reach out to him or whatever. And whether they end up in a romantic relationship against all odds, against those circumstances that the universe that Miller was referring to, is truly up in the air. If their relationship truly ends in tragedy and they never see each other again, we'll find out in 2027. Lastly, their relationship has a direct impact on Miles's relationship with his parents, as well as Gwen's relationship with Rio and Jeff, which I will talk about more in their section later.
You're the best thing I've ever done.
So most of what I wanted to say about Gwen and George was in the section of the comparison between Gwen's relationship with George and then her relationship with Miguel. But I also wanted to talk about the scene where they make up near the end of the film, that really gorgeous sequence. There's another element of, like, there's so many elements of tragedy when it comes to relationships in Spider-Verse. They're not all just, oh yeah, we're all best friends, we're family. There's always like an element of sadness and tragedy. Like, there's no other way I can really put it. With George, it's so interesting to think about how he was doing everything that he was doing as a police officer for Gwen. The irony, of course, is the fact that he didn't know that Gwen was Spider-Woman, but his obsession with finding Spider-Woman was because he wanted to not only avenge Peter, but to avenge Peter on behalf of Gwen. He was so blinded with what he was doing that he couldn't really grasp the idea that this was not helping his daughter, especially when Gwen's saying things like, this isn't really gonna do anything, or kind of like, what's really the point here? And Captain Stacy's not really hearing all of that because he's very one-track minded with, no, I have to stop the Spider-Woman. And then Gwen has to deal with her own issues with being like, okay, well, my father's trying to do this on my behalf, but then he's fighting me. It's like this really complex situation. Their makeup scene was very emotionally impactful for me because Gwen has been missing, at least from George's point of view, for months. And he sees her and then they have this whole conversation. It's really, I think, thanks to Hobie and him coming to speak to George beforehand that kind of prepped this moment to happen. And I will talk about that if I haven't already in the Gwen and Hobie section. But their reunion is really a moment of understanding. They actually see each other, and that hug, the way it's animated, is just so gorgeous. To look at this moment and then look at the beginning where Captain Stacy's like holding a gun to his own daughter, and then to be like, everything's not 100% okay because they don't really have enough time to sit and actually like talk about it because Gwen has to go. She has a mission to complete. The fact that George is just there and is like, I quit my job for you. Another thing that he's doing for Gwen, this time actually for her. It's heartbreaking, but it's also heartwarming that George is making this effort to be a better father and actually take the steps to make room for a better relationship between the two.
Spider-Woman.
Me too.
I want you to challenge your perceptions of female characters. Now hold on. Don't get all mad. Don't click off the video. I need you to actually like sit and listen to this because this is not a summarization video. This is a mix of summary, recap, retrospection, and media analysis. Part of media analysis is looking deeper into things, actually doing close readings. So I want you to be open-minded and like actually think. Don't get up in arms. Don't come with the pitchforks and stuff. I want you to challenge your notion of how you expect female characters to act, particularly Black women. I know, people get mad when people say it, but look, this is just the truth when it comes to media studies, film and television studies, and like how stereotypes are perpetuated or subverted. And in this case, subverted. We're talking about Gwen and Jessica Drew. There was a comment on Instagram under a post of a picture of Gwen and Jessica Drew, and this was drawn by a concept artist who worked on the film, and people were in the comments, and I don't want to put their specific comments up because I don't want to target them in any way, but people were saying that they wanted Jess to be more motherly towards Gwen, and they were disappointed that she wasn't. The specific term motherly bothers me because certain portrayals of certain groups of people in media or elsewhere do not exist within a vacuum, okay? There are tropes that are created and that are followed with some tweaks here and there. The problem is that people expected Jess to act out of character because they have a notion of how a Black woman, a Black female character, should act. And they do this to other women in media too. You have this trope of like the mom friend of the group, that type of thing. I think it's particularly annoying when it's with Black women because of the mammy trope. Now, Jessica Drew does not fall, at least in my opinion, within the mammy trope, but I think people's expectations of her do fall within the mammy trope. This is a quote from BBC, and it's about the mammy. The history of black women on screen is closely tied up with the mammy figure, a racist caricature divorced from the reality of U.S. race relations during slavery and afterwards. Traditionally depicted as a dark-skinned, overweight woman wearing a head wrap and shawl, the mammy is employed by a white family to care for their children and is utterly devoted to her charges. There are so many examples of like mammy character types and examples out there, and you might be like, oh, Destiny, you're reading too into it. There's no such thing as a coincidence. I think the expectation that because a female character is older, they have to have this like inherent motherly, nurturing vibe or like relationship with younger characters or even characters their own age is frustrating, especially in relation to Jessica Drew, because she made it very apparent, like, look, if you step out of line, there's nothing I can do to help you. She makes it very clear. It would be one thing if Jess told Gwen, I'll always stand by you, I'll always have your back, and then turned around and was like, nope, hands off, can't help you, when Miguel was confronting Gwen. But Jessica Drew stood on business. She made it very clear that, look, this is the type of person I am. This is the type of mentor I am. If you step out of line, if you do anything to jeopardize your role within the Spider Society, I cannot help you. And people saw that and were like, I'm just gonna pretend I didn't hear that. And like I said about Gwen and Miles, you can be upset at the way characters treat other characters, but like, don't act like it came out of nowhere when it comes to both of those characters, because Jess made it very clear this is the type of person she is, whatever. And people still had this idea that because Jess is her mentor and that she's older than her, that she was somehow going to be this mother figure in her life based on like what? Mammy stereotypes, based on the idea that female characters have to be nurturing. Jess's personality is such a breath of fresh air for me as a black woman that it's frustrating that people expected her to behave completely out of character because they had this idea in their head that characters like Jessica Drew have to behave in certain ways, and that's annoying. I just want people to consider why you wanted Jessica Drew to be this mother figure outside of her being Gwen's mentor, because your idea of why that should be does not exist outside of being influenced by the way black women and women in general are treated within film. Always the mother figure, always the nurturer, always the caregiver. It's like, you have this badass woman in front of you and you can't even take that. It's annoying. Also, people are obsessed with the found family trope. I am too, to a certain degree, but there are other dynamics out there. Not everybody who is in proximity to another person is like their family, okay? This also goes into like the MCU when people are like, oh, the OG Avengers, they're a family. I'm like, no, they're not. That's another topic for another day. But this is not to say that Jess does not care about Gwen. There are also different ways of caring about somebody without being this like motherly yes man or yes woman in this case. In the screenplay, Gwen says to Jess, you never made a mistake? Never got too close to someone? Jess says, I did, but I got over it. That came out a bit harsher than she wanted. She feels bad. God damn it. So it's not like she doesn't care for Gwen. And even later on, when she's seeing Miguel crash out, confront Gwen in the way that he did before he sent her home, you can also see it on her face, and other spider people were like, whoa, Miguel is out of line. But she didn't do anything, not because she didn't want to, but because there's a time and a place to act, and you can't just start going like guns blazing. That's not how it works. And I do believe that Jess is going to be a big part of what happens with Gwen in Beyond the Spider-Verse, because she let Gwen go. Like, don't forget that. She let Gwen walk through that portal. Jess does care about Gwen, but not in the way that people expected her to. Those two do have this mentor-pupil relationship that we don't entirely get to see because we don't see the entire months-long interactions that they have. There is another part in the screenplay. It refers to Gwen and Jessica Drew kind of as like an older sister, younger sister dynamic, as opposed to like a mother-daughter dynamic. So that's another thing to consider when thinking about them.
Wendy, how much have you told him? About his place and all this?
A little.
Maybe not enough.
Whether Gwen and Hobie had a romantic relationship or not, is the least important thing to me about those two's dynamic, specifically in relation to Gwen's entire situation with her father. More on that a little later. But I wanted to start out this section by rehashing the quotes that I read in Hobie's section from Kemp Powers. Once again, he's, meaning Hobie, that cool, slightly older boy who was pretty easy for most girls to have a crush on. And I bring that quote in because I can't see the filmmakers making those two have a relationship if, like, once again, Powers says that Hobie is much older than Miles. And if he's much older than Miles, he's much older than Gwen because Gwen isn't that much older than Miles. And I just can't see the filmmakers making a relationship with that age difference. It just feels kind of out of character for them. But the reason I bring up that first quote is because I think it would make sense that upon entering the Spider Society, Gwen could have initially had a crush on Hobie, and this is pure speculation, but then obviously nothing happened because of the age difference. And the reason I say the romantic element is the least most important part about those two is because Hobie makes it very clear when he's talking to Miles, when Miles is like, so why are you even here? And Hobie's like, I'm just looking out for my drummer. And when Gwen mentions offhandedly that Hobie lets her stay in his dimension to Miles, because once again, the film is from his perspective, so was Into the Spider-Verse. This is all gonna seem like Gwen and Hobie had or have this thing going on because Miles has a crush on Gwen and has always had a crush on her. But knowing exactly what Gwen went through with her father makes total sense that he would allow her to crash in his dimension, given that she really has nowhere else to really go. And also knowing, and I don't know if, no, I didn't mention this before, there's a deleted scene that is not featured in the Blu-ray because once again, the only deleted scene that's featured is Miguel calling. There's one that the filmmakers during the filmmakers commentary allude to, that there was a deleted scene of Hobie talking to Captain Stacy when he went to deliver the watch. And when Captain Stacy says, oh yeah, that guy was a real piece of work or something like that, I'm sure Hobie was not happy because of the type of character and the type of morals that Hobie represents as a punk. And then also to have Gwen be his friend, she surely told him about what happened. Of course, there's no universe for her to go back home to. To offer his universe as a place for her to stay is a very kind thing to do. And I'm sure back to that deleted scene that he chewed out Captain Stacy in some way or form that prepped a whole conversation between him and his daughter in the end to happen. Hobie set the stage for that to happen. To know that Hobie and Gwen have gone on a bunch of missions together, that's mentioned too. When people focus too much on this, oh, Hobie and Gwen must have had something going on, which I think is just a red herring, honestly, because it's like too obvious. I don't feel like something romantic was actually going on with these two. I don't know. I feel like from Miles's like jealous perspective, that just makes sense that that's how he would perceive it. And because we're seeing the film from his eyes, from his perspective, we're also seeing it that way, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm just not convinced of the whole thing. But anyways, Hobie, once again, my MVP, my GOAT, he is the reason why she's able to leave her universe to go after Miles because he delivers the watch that he creates. Like once again, his whole comment about, oh, just looking after my drummer. Gwen is somebody that Hobie cares about, is somebody that he's looking out for. We see that with the watch, and he knows how much Miles means to her, which is another reason why giving her the watch and then showing up with everybody else at the end to go and rescue Miles is also significant. But also, I love the idea of Hobie and Gwen's relationship being that close, not that close romantically, but being close enough where it's like, oh yeah, I'm stealing your shoes to wear. Like, I'm stealing your shoes. Oh, I'm building this watch. I'm making sure that it gets to your house. I'm chewing out your dad for you. They're obviously close. Gwen also clearly thinks highly of Hobie, considering the fact that when she's talking to Miles, somebody who she spent so much time thinking about and wanting to be with, she says, oh, you would love Hobie. Gwen considers Miles her first real friend that she's made since Peter died. For her to say that Miles would love Hobie is high praise. Also, who doesn't look at Hobie and thinks, wow, that's like the coolest guy ever? Who wouldn't want to hang around that guy? Hobie's skepticism with the whole concept of the Spider Society and, of course, his feelings about Miguel made him prep for something like Miguel's crash out to happen, because I'm sure to him it was just a matter of time that this all was going to go to hell. Hence why he's gathering all of the watch materials. It must be hard to see somebody he cares about like Gwen, yet like when Hobie is sitting and preparing for like the worst case scenario and then he finally sees it happens, he probably felt very vindicated that he was preparing and was able to help out his drummer, which in turn helped Miles. and probably more spider people down the line.
It's not your fault. It's mine.
Oh, come on. What the heck are you doing here?
Like I stressed in Miles, Rio, and Jeff's section earlier in this video, they are a very close family unit, and for Rio and Jeff to see that there's something going on with their son and them having no idea what it is, him refusing to tell them, but knowing it's something that's deeply troubling him is obviously cause for concern. And the only clue that they have as to what is going on with Miles is the presence of Gwen. From their perspective, Gwen is the reason why their son is being so secretive and why he's acting so testy with them. And they're not entirely wrong, but the entire element of him being Spider-Man is of course nowhere on their mind because they really have no idea. This first starts when Rio and Jeff go into Miles's room during the party that they're throwing for Jeff, and they see Gwen's cardigan on Miles's bed. And obviously that's not Miles's cardigan. Afterwards, they are introduced to Gwen when they kind of interrupt Gwen and Miles's moment that they're having away from like the roof party. Rio says stuff like, "Oh, don't take him from me and don't break his heart." Obviously that's played off for laughs, but there's hints of truth to it. And we get more of this in the last scene that we see Rio and Jeff with their interaction with Gwen. Miles's parents and him are very close, and as overprotective parents, they are seeing this girl come in and they're making connections between, okay, maybe she's being a bad influence on him, maybe she's causing him some type of trouble. They really don't know. And it doesn't help that Gwen wasn't raised in the same ways that Miles was. Like, for instance, in my culture as well, we don't call adults by their first names. We always call them by their last names, Mr., Mrs., Miss, whatever. So when Gwen is introduced to them formally and she's like, "Oh, you're Jeff, oh, you're Rio," that rubs them the wrong way. And then of course when Rio is saying stuff like, "Oh, I bet she doesn't even speak Spanish," and then Jeff's saying like, "Spit it out, emo," or whatever else, there's clearly this tension between the three of them because of the secret that Miles is holding that Gwen also has knowledge of. I should also mention during the clock tower scene, Gwen advises Miles not to tell his parents he's Spider-Man because she does not want to see what happened with her father happen to him and his tight family unit. And she says to Rio and Jeff at the end, "Miles loves you guys more than you would ever know," and that is reference to the fact that he literally stood up to the entire Spider Society and is like, "No, you're not gonna sit here and let my dad die. I'm gonna do something about it. Like, this is my family." That is the love that Gwen is referring to when she's talking to them. And this is really good subtextual writing because we as an audience know what she's talking about, but Rio and Jeff don't. Rio and Jeff are talking very plainly about make sure he knows that we love him, tell him he's grounded, that type of thing. But then Gwen is kind of speaking around certain topics, like her saying, "Oh yeah, you're not gonna find my dad at that police department. He's kind of hard to get on the horn because he's obviously in another universe." So Gwen having so much information about Miles that she obviously can't tell Rio and Jeff also has to be hard for Rio and Jeff to know that they can't help their son because they don't know what's going on with him. They don't know where he is. Gwen tells them, "I don't know where Miles is." And that's when Jeff's like, "Well, that's his sweater emo." So that has to be such a hard thing for parents to hear. I don't know if I mentioned this in previous parts of this video essay, but there's a whole section in the Blu-ray and also the special features about parents and how parenting is shown within this film and their relationships with their children. I'm not a parent, but as a child to parents, not to sound like Peter B, as a son to a mother, I can see how it might feel to have your child not tell you something and then to not know the extent to which they're hurting or like going through things, especially with such a tight unit where they tell each other everything and what's going on with one another. It's gotta be hard. Whatever Rio and Jeff might think is going on with their son, it's 10 times worse because he's not even in their universe. I just hope that we get to see the three of them interact in Beyond the Spider-Verse if Jeff makes it out alive and Gwen is still able to travel between different universes, so we can get that conclusion to that. Because Rio and Jeff talk about how when Gwen overhears their conversation about how they hope that Gwen isn't going to cause any harm to Miles, I hope that she doesn't hurt him, or I hope that she doesn't break his heart. They know that their son likes Gwen romantically, and this is something that Rio even says when she's like, "Oh, I didn't mean to ice your game, man." When they have that moment after Gwen leaves. This is part of like the whole parenting thing. Oh, your child has a crush on this person. How do we traverse this topic with them? And that type of thing. I just hope that we get to a point where they can actually have a meet the parents moment where it isn't so high stakes as like, oh, I need to go rescue your son. And Gwen also promises them that she will bring him back. So hopefully that does happen and they get on better footing and aren't so accusatory of Gwen and don't see her in such a negative light once they finally, if they finally get to know the whole story of Miles being Spider-Man.
Lila, do the thing.
Huh? What thing?
What do you mean, what thing? The information, explain anything.
Okay.
This is going to be another short section because Lila and Miguel's relationship is pretty straightforward, but I just wanted to start with the fact that Lila is actually an acronym that stands for Lyrate Life Form Approximation, and according to Powers, she was created by Miguel, but her personality has continued to develop on her own, which explains her sense of humor that Miguel does not share. He also goes on to say Lila is more than a digital assistant since she is Miguel's closest friend. Lila would probably describe herself as his only friend in the world. It's also said in the art book that Lila records Miguel's personal diary entries, and I would pay good money to see exactly Miguel has vented to Lila, like, Dear Diary, I hate Miles Morales, or whatever is going on in that brain of his. Lila isn't only Miguel's personal assistant, she also helps out within the Spider Society. We see her helping Margo with the go home machine seemingly malfunctioning when Miles is invisible and trying to go home. We also see her helping Jessica Drew and pointing out the spot, jumping between different worlds when Gwen is dealing with the aftermath of the spot disappearing on her. Miguel and Lila's relationship is funny to look at because it is played off for comedy in the way that she makes fun of him and pokes fun of him in a similar way that Jess Drew does. And it happens in the same scene, you know, when Miguel's like, call for backup, and Lila's just messing around with him. I should also mention that Lila helped Miguel create the interdimensional watch, which in turn created the interdimensional portal that we see at the end of Into the Spider-Verse, and whether Miguel created Lila with the intention of having help to create the interdimensional watch, or if he had created her beforehand, is really just speculation, but it is kind of interesting to think about why Miguel would create an AI assistant and for what purpose, especially because this is before his whole going to another dimension and ruining everything by trying to get his daughter back.
Is it because she called you Dark Garfield?
No.
Do you say anything but no?
No. Yes.
After Lila, Jess is Miguel's right-hand woman. She's the backup Miguel refers to in the Guggenheim Museum when he's being taunted by Lila, and she's in his small elite team that he has within the Spider Society along with Ben Reilly for some reason. They have a dynamic that is different from Gwen and Miguel because they're both adults. Jess is not afraid to poke fun at Miguel, you know, the whole is it because she called you Dark Garfield thing. She isn't intimidated by him in a way that other Spider people might be, because Jess is just too cool. And she's very strategic about her defiance against what Miguel is now standing for, which we see in her facial expressions and her behavior by letting Gwen go through the portal instead of stopping her or reporting her to Miguel. Jessica Drew is somebody that Miguel trusts and is within his inner circle, his go-to team. Jess is the one who first suggests to Miguel to let Gwen join the Spider Society after seeing her in action, and this is despite knowing Gwen and Miles's history. She also takes on Gwen as her apprentice. She's her mentor, and that's something that had to be approved by Miguel, I'm sure. She also essentially convinces Miguel to take Gwen with them. It's like a nonverbal look that she gives him, and then that leads to Miguel's whole fatherly instinct thing that I talked about. And she brings the heart to the Miguel and Jess dynamic because, as I discussed, the type of person Miguel is, he's like, oh, I have this burden on my shoulder, work, 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 no matter what, this is what we need to do. Once again, Jess is in Miguel's inner circle, and he trusts her enough to have her go and scope out Miles's house and go after Miles in the first place. That just, once again, shows their trust. And that is a trust that ends up being broken in a way because Jess is defiant by letting Gwen go. Jess believes, or at least believed, in Miguel's cause to whatever extent, especially because she joined the Spider Society. She agreed to stopping these anomalies, even the same way that Gwen saw it, like, oh yeah, we're the good guys, we're supposed to be the good guys. That crumbles when she sees Miguel forcefully send Gwen home, and then just like the way he's acting insane over the whole Miles situation. We don't know yet how this is going to end with these two, whether there's going to be a confrontation where Jess ends up taking Miles and Gwen's side, if there ends up being like a huge confrontation at the end. We do know that she obviously is seeing the wrong in what Miguel's doing, and she's taking action towards that. And if Miguel finds out, he's not going to be happy. Regardless, Jess is going to do what Jess is going to do, and she's going to do what she feels is right. She's just going to go about it in a more strategic way.
Who isn't funny? We're supposed to be funny.
The fate of the multiverse.
You always lose me with that. You say, the fate of the multiverse, and my brain dies.
The main thing with these two that I saw a lot of people wondering was, why was Peter B. Parker in that world that Miguel had replaced his alternate version of himself that got murdered or whatever? When Miguel's explaining all of this to Miles in the Spider Society, he's telling Miles what had happened when he broke the canon, and he says something like, right, Peter, or something like that. And Peter kind of turns away. But if you watch that scene closely, which I was not when I saw it in theaters because I was so caught up in the moment of what was happening and all the chaos. But if you watch it back, it's not just Peter B that's there. It's a bunch of other spider people who are swinging in the foreground and the background. It seems because there are other spider people there trying to save people and presumably stop the world from disintegrating in the same way that they were doing to Pav's world, that this is post Miguel creating the Spider Society initially, meaning that he tried to replace himself while trying to fix anomalies, which I think is weird because wouldn't he know to a certain extent? I don't know. Another thing that is played for comedic effect, but is actually really sad to think about, is how Peter B has a daughter and Miguel lost his daughter several times, or at least more than once. And Peter B is, I wouldn't necessarily say flaunting the fact that he has a daughter to Miguel on purpose, because he's just very excited to have a child and is very fascinated with Mayday and just the idea of being a father. That's just all he talks about. So unfortunately, Miguel is just caught in the crossfire of having to hear all of it. Miguel isn't outwardly hateful or like resentful about it. The scene where he catches Mayday when she like falls off of him and everything like that, he isn't actively trying to keep Mayday away from him or like tell Peter, okay, like stop, that's enough, whatever. But it's just sad to think about the fact that he lost his daughter and then he has to see Spider-Man have his daughter and just be like, oh my god, I love having my daughter, isn't she great? And Miguel's just like constantly dealing with the grief of having lost his daughter. I wouldn't call him the right-hand man to Miguel because that's clearly Jessica Drew and Lila, but they do seem to have some type of relationship that we haven't seen in this film that had happened before. The year is 2023, and we're all sat in the exact same movie theater watching Across the Spider-Verse at the exact same time, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And we watch a lineup of Gwen's Spider-Band getting ready to enter a portal to go rescue Miles. Then the credits roll. Excellent movie, we all loved it, we all cheered, did 5 backflips. But then we go online and we see people viscerally angry about the fact that this film was split into 2 parts. Now, maybe I'm projecting and I'm the only one who saw this, but a lot of people were very upset that the movie was split into 2 parts, and I was very confused because, as this tweet from Phil Lord shows, this is December 4th, 2021, Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, which means that this is the first of 2 parts, or multiple parts. At this point we might not know that it was only going to be 2 parts, that the next film is going to be split into parts. Maybe not everybody was on Twitter.com looking at Phil Lord's account, but it wasn't unknown that this film was going to be into 2 parts, and I just thought it was really odd that people were so excited, and rightfully so, about how gorgeous the film looked and how amazing it was animated, and then be upset that the film is split into 2 parts and that it's taking so long to come out. And actually, I started recording for this video essay before we got a specific date for Beyond the Spider-Verse, and now we have it, June 4th, 2027. And there was more outrage about that. Oh, it's taking so long. It was supposed to come out in blah, blah, blah year. And I just want people to consider just how long it takes to make a film. Filmmaking, period, takes like 15 billion years. But to do animation on top of that, I can't even imagine. And to know how much work went into this film specifically, they talk a lot about this in the filmmaker's commentary, but just shots that we would think, oh, this probably didn't take that long, or like, oh, this is just such a short sequence, took literal years to animate. They were talking about how the rooftop party scene for Jeff took years to animate because it's a whole crowd of people, not to mention the Spider Society chase scene. I can't even imagine how long that took to make. And it was years, it was said in the filmmaker's commentary. But yeah, it took years to make. So to know that all of that, but just those specific scenes themselves took years, we can't even imagine how long it takes to make the entire film. And then also they had to create entirely new tools of animation to animate specific characters like Hobie and also Pav. And that just gives you a little bit of a glimpse for how long it takes to create Spider-Verse film. And then we have the storyboarders, we have the animators, the 3D modelers, the composers, the voice actors. There's so many things that go into it. I understand as a fan it can be frustrating, but then also as a creative, it's also like stuff takes time to make. You don't just blink and it's done. I think it's odd to praise a film for being so beautiful and so impactful and then also complain that it takes a long time. How do you think we got to that beautiful, impactful, like how do you think we got there? It had to take time. Anyways, that's my little rant on that. Now, we can talk a little bit about Beyond the Spider-Verse. Power says, you'll have to wait till the next movie to see the solution, but it's not as simple as just, let me get out of here and get home. This is a problem that I, meaning Miles, also have to solve because it's a problem of my own creation. He also goes on to say that Miles will have to make a decision of what kind of superhero he wants to be based on what he chooses to do. And we see some of that with his refusal to go along with what the Spider Society is saying he has to do. Miles seems to be very solid on his views and his morals. Not even for a second he thought, oh, you know, maybe the Spider Society is right. Maybe I should just let my dad die. Like, that was never a thought that occurred to him. He instantly saw it as wrong and he stood 10 toes down on that. That is part of the type of superhero Miles wants to be. I can do both. Spider-Man can do both. And Pav has a similar mentality to that because it hasn't gotten like drilled into him like with the other Spider people, because when he sees Gayatri and Singh, he's like, no, I can save them. Like, I can do both. He says something similar to that. And that's like foreshadowing to what Miles ends up doing later on in the movie. The idea of not being as simple as, okay, well, the Spider-Man's here, let's just get out of here. And this is very light theorizing, my thought is that Miles is gonna have to help Miles G in some way with the Sinister Six cartel, kind of as a deal as like, oh, we'll let you go if you help, like an obligation type of thing. And even if it's not directly Miles G saying this to Miles, the fact that it's a problem of his own creation, even though Miles didn't ask to be bit by the spider, there's still this guilt over the fact that Earth 42 is in this mess because Miles got bit. And Miguel even screams in Miles's face, like, if you hadn't got bit by that spider, your Peter would still be alive, and then that spider would have bit somebody else on Earth 42. Look at all these helicopters and barbed fences and stuff like that. This place is in turmoil because there's no spider person to save the day. And Miles isn't the type of person to just see that and be like, okay, well, that's not my problem, I gotta go. In one of the special features, I'm gonna do my own thing, Interdimensional Destiny, the filmmakers in this specific segment seem to all be for the choose your own destiny type of theme that we're getting within this film, and being yourself and pushing against what you're supposed to do. In Miles's case, you're supposed to just go along with canon. So seeing how much that was emphasized within that specific special feature made me think that that's just a theme that's going to be carried over into the next film. I can't see it being like, oh, well, Miles's idea of, nah, I'm gonna do my own thing, he's gonna eventually learn, like, oh, no, he can't do his own thing. I don't think that's how it would go. It's very contradictory to what we're being shown in this film, especially when you have Gwen saying things to Jessica Drew when they're chasing Miles, like, my gut is saying that this is wrong. And Jess says something like, don't follow your gut, listen to your head, or something like that. So that's just a theme that we're going to see in the next film. I'm very, very certain. I want to speak very briefly, well, as briefly as I can, already 2 hours in, about canon and how that has looked in Across the Spider-Verse and how it's been subverted or destroyed in Across the Spider-Verse, especially the implications, and we'll talk about that in a second. So in the scene that I use for Miguel and Gwen's section, it's during a conversation where Gwen asks Miguel, do you know for sure what happens when he, meaning Miles, breaks the canon? And Miguel says, do you want to find out? I found this line of dialogue, like these lines of dialogue, very interesting considering the fact that we do know what happens when you break canon. For instance, Miguel explains to Miles and by proxy Gwen and everybody else, all of the other spider people who are in the room with him, what happened when he came back to replace himself after that universe's version of him was killed, right? So he disrupts canon by being there and taking over the life of himself, and that leads to his entire world falling apart. Not only that, but we see what happens when Singh and Gayatri are both saved by Pav and Miles respectively, and then Pav's world begins to fall apart. So we would think, okay, well, you break the canon, the world falls apart. It disintegrates, it gets destroyed, whatever. But when Gwen speaking to her father in their last scenes together in this film, Officer Stacy decides that in that moment he doesn't want to be an officer anymore. That's part of the whole reason why Miles is so adamant about saving his father, because Miguel explains to him part of Spider-Man's canon event is a officer who's close to Spider-Man, a police captain specifically, dies saving a child. But in this moment, Captain Stacy disrupts the canon. He diverts from the canon because of Gwen's actions, because of the speech that she gives him about why she is Spider-Woman and everything like that. And as far as we know, Gwen's world doesn't fall apart because of that subversion. So my question is, does this just result in a course correct then? Does another person become captain and then that person dies to save a child? Or is this subverting canon to the point where nothing bad's gonna happen? And if that's the case, does that mean there are ways of subverting canon without destroying the world? Because as Gwen says, do you know what happens when he breaks the canon? If the definitive answer isn't the world just falls apart, then that kind of leaves room for this idea that there's other ways to divert from canon, to leave canon without it being so destructive, like what happened with Pav's world. That makes me wonder about the end game of Beyond the Spider-Verse. Is there a way Miles can save his father without the world falling apart? Can he just explain to his father, I mean, obviously it wouldn't be this simple, but could he just explain to his father, like, hey, you can't be captain anymore, and then, like, would his father just not die? And then what are the implications of the line reading that very specific dialogue? Do you know what happens when you go against the canon versus seeing what happens when the canon's actually broken, and then compared to George Stacy no longer being captain, which has been established as a canon event? I don't know, it's just something that has really been like bugging me, especially because of the way the film has presented canon as this sure thing, like this is what's going to happen no matter what. But we see that Captain Stacy's no longer Captain Stacy. And then to reiterate, does that mean another captain will die in his place, or does that mean that's just no longer the canon in Gwen's universe? And if that's the case, why was Gwen able to change the canon in that way without it being so disruptive? Was it because it wasn't her who directly influenced the canon? Like, she didn't say, hey, you have to stop being captain. Was it because Captain Stacy decided of his own volition that he didn't want to be captain anymore? I don't know. That's just something I wanted to put out there. They also tease some things for what's going to happen in the next film, within the filmmaker's commentary specifically. And I won't go over every single little thing that they said, but I definitely highly suggest checking out the Blu-ray and its features to get more hints about what could happen in Beyond the Spider-Verse. I did want to say this here, that even though they might have said specific things in those Blu-rays or like in interviews and stuff like that about how the next film might go, it's all subject to change. Because we don't know how far along into development they were when they created Across the Spider-Verse, or even when they spoke about Across the Spider-Verse in the special features. So some of the stuff that I'm about to say or have already said might be changed for Beyond the Spider-Verse, since we still have a couple years of development or finalizing the film left. So the main thing I took away from the filmmaker's commentary when it comes to foreshadowing is their discussion of the Go Home machine. They say that she is made of organic matter. And I thought that that was really interesting that they brought that up, and they said it kind of cheekily. It was hard to tell exactly who was saying what because there's no subtitles for the director's commentary, so it doesn't tell you like who exactly is saying what, but they were being very cheeky about like, oh, maybe we'll see what's going on with that spider in the next film. Things like that. They also made a point of mentioning that Go Home Machine, not only is she organic, but she was not designed by Miguel. And by that thought, that means that she doesn't necessarily have a real obligation to him because she's not something that was created by Miguel. Here's something from the screenplay. It says, Margo operates a console as a scary alabaster semi-mechanical spider named ANYR descends from the ceiling. Especially because the Go Home Machine is what forcibly sends anomalies or even like spider people back home. The idea that she is an organic being and might have her own thoughts and feelings on things and doesn't just take orders from Miguel, that could be a really big thing in Beyond the Spider-Verse. As I mentioned previously, the whole point of this video was like a retrospective, like a look back to the film, and then also just like a tiny bit of speculation, but also some analysis mixed in there. So it's like a nice fruit salad mixture of those three things. If you ask me what I think is going to happen in Beyond the Spider-Verse, I literally don't know. I don't think any of us is really going to be able to predict what's going on. I'm scared, but I am looking forward to seeing what's going to happen. I find it hard to believe that we'd either get a completely good or a completely bad ending. Bad meaning that Miles can't save his dad and his dad dies and he's stuck in Earth 42, whatever. And then good meaning like Miles saves the day and there's no consequences for anything and he's just like, yippee, we're all fine and we're in a spider band and we can visit each other all the time. It's like, I don't think the screenwriters for this film or the directors of this film would go either of those roads because I kind of think that's just bad writing in general because they're both very predictable endings. I think the filmmakers make it clear narratively that characters like our villains are neither all good or all bad, which is another reason why I don't think the ending is going to be all good or all bad. That'll probably extend to Beyond the Spider-Verse's narrative. And Across the Spider-Verse, there was a lot of will they, won't they with Gwen and Miles, and I think we'll finally get a definitive answer in Beyond the Spider-Verse, whatever that may be. But yeah, the questions right now are like, will Miles save his dad? Will he be able to go home? Will he ever get to see his friends again long term? Will Miles have to make some big sacrifice where he never sees anyone ever again in order to fix the canon? Whatever. I doubt that because the whole point is like, we should be able to write our own destinies and be our own people. And then is Miguel gonna have like a change of heart? Is he gonna be like, oh my bad, Miles? Like, what's gonna happen with him? There's so many questions, and that might be another reason why this film's taking so long to make, because we gotta figure this stuff out. This has been my Across the Spider-Verse video essay. If you follow me on Instagram, you've been hearing me talk about this for like 45 years. It's finally out. I'm very grateful. If you've listened to this whole thing, I'm incredibly grateful. Feel free to use this video essay as a refresher on the film and the characters and their relationships for Beyond the Spider-Verse when it comes out in 2027. And if you have any concerns, complaints, comments, anything, go ahead and leave them in the comment section. But I will say that if you have any specific things that you disagree with me about this film or anything that I had said in this video essay, that's completely fine. But if you are going to comment it, I would like to see your evidence for disagreeing. This is like a Socratic seminar that you're being forced to do in like high school English. I need you to bring your evidence, your timestamps, your dialogue, your body language, like all the specific things if you're going to disagree with me. Not saying that I was right about everything in here, but I want to keep like a dialogue going about this film for as long as we can before we find out more about it. So that's one way to do it. Bring your evidence to class. 2 to 3 pieces of evidence per statement. Anyways, I wanted to thank everyone again for watching this, and there will be more video essays in the future. My next video is going to be talking about a Blu-ray that is very near and dear to my heart. If you know, you know. But yeah, thanks again.